Welcome to
Hey y'all. Welcome to the Meru Media Podcast. And we are live with Sammy. What's up?
What's
Sorry.
up?
Sorry guys. My the StreamYard was all funky, which is why Sammy couldn't join us earlier when we started. So my apologies. We are up and running. We're live. We're good. This is fantastic. Sammy, what's going on, my friend?
Just got back from work. So it was good. With all that technical difficulties, it gave me time for my headphones to charge. So, maybe it was a little blessing. So,
Okay.
Yeah. So nothing much. If anyone's checked out my whole Instagram tirade, I went off on a little Dravidian nationalist. So,
What happened?
That was fun. You're just trying to tell me that he's not Hindu, he's Tamil, whatever that means. And then showed him Tiruvidiyada Puranam, which showed like Muruga teaching Shiva Vedas. And then he's like, it doesn't say Vedas there, which it did, but it did say Vedam. And then so he lied to me, thinking because I'm American and Telugu, he could pull one on me. So when I called him out, I'm like, I know what it says. He's like, well, the dialogue's in Tamil, and when he asked him to explain the Vedas, he explains it in Tamil. So maybe Vedam is a Tamil word. So I was like, okay. So yeah, we roasted him a bunch, and then it was a good opportunity though. I got to teach a lot of people Tamil literature, and I put the whole thing on my Instagram story. So anyone wants to see that debacle.
That's always so with these Dravidian nationalists. This is always a problem. It's like you have, first of all, your premise. I mean, not your premise, but their premise.
Yeah, their premise.
That somehow there's this utterly separate Dravidian culture for thousands of years, and there might have been for thousands of years earlier, but for the past 3,000 years, the Dravidian culture that exists in India, whether it's Tamil, Telugu, Kannada, Malayalam, does not know anything but Tamil or ancient Dravida languages mixed with Sanskrit and the entire world. Yep. So it's such a weird idea, I think, in my head, to like how much mental gymnastics that has to be done to get beyond the fact that Tamilness and Kannada-ness and Telugu-ness and Malayaliness is deeply Hindu at some level, right? And now it's not to say there's not other Christians and Muslims and other people there that have contributed over the past like 1,500 years, but its core for everything it talks about is very Hindu.
Yeah. As far as Tamil's been able to document its existence, it's been nothing but Hindu. So yeah,
it's very interesting.
Yeah, it's just funny how that works. And I don't know, he tried to DM me some weird freaky stuff, which I'm not gonna get into, and then he I guess like to mess with me, he started throwing kissing emojis at me. I'm like, you're a freaky dude. And then he showed me that he is indeed a believer, and he showed me some Murugan tattoo. He took a picture of his arm and said, this guy mental issues ultimately, which is fun. And so yeah.
But sometimes when I think about this, I feel like to be fair, and we try to be as generous and charitable as I can, is maybe their issue is just the term like Hindu or Vedam, because many traditions today don't even know and go to Vedas, right? They really are in their tradition following, like, so if you're following a Muruga path, you just have certain scriptures that are in, let's say, just Tamil, but they're all talking about Muruga. They reference Muruga as, as Kartikeya, Skanda, whatever, but there's not really that much in terms of connection, or at least perceived connection by the follower to the ancient Hindu traditions. Even though it's there, they just don't know it, right?
Yeah, exactly.
But you find that with even Lingayats sometimes when they talk about their their Shaivism, right? They're very much like, oh yeah, we're not Hindu. Sometimes they'll say, even ISKCON, right? By the way, will be like, we're not Hindu. Although they will say they're Vedic, they will not say they're Hindu. So there's interesting lines of demarcation here, which I find to be very interesting, fascinating.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So we want to do some Jordan Peterson stuff. There's other things that we can touch on over time, but let's see here.
I had a blast with this one, by the way, watching it. I enjoyed it.
Yeah, the setup is actually pretty interesting, right?
Yeah,
the setup is really interesting.
Before I get into it, I actually wanted to get your take on it. What do you think about that whole 20v1 format? You get one person in the middle, one guy runs into it, and
I don't mind it. The only problem is I think people want to jump in, so there's not sometimes enough time to expand on a topic. But when we see this particular conversation, I'm like, you could have given the dude 2 hours on one particular topic, and it would have just been going in circles.
Yeah,
that
is true. I think for the type of person that Jordan Peterson is, I think this was exactly what we needed. So
yeah, and the thing is, again, I mean, we'll get into whether he's Christian or not, or what he is, but yeah, let's do this. All right, let's start this. Present, share screen. Okay, it says all right, there we go. So let's just start with this. All right. Actually, should I speed it up? What do you think?
Yeah, we can.
What? Let's do 1.25. I think that.
Yeah, 1.25. I think is special. Is perfect.
So let's start with his first question. Okay. So that's an interesting point. He has to make it a issue of some sort of hurt or pain, that why people would reject the idea of God, right? Obviously, it just can't because they're reasonable or they have their own experiences of that are probably true too. It just has to be a claim that, oh, you must be like a suffering some sort of trauma response.
Yeah. And what you'll find is, I've actually had a lot to say about Mr. Peterson for a minute. He really, and I want to know what you think about this take. It's a hot one. Yeah. I think he tries to explain Christianity in a Hindu way, because the only way he can make sense of spirituality without going into this hyper literalism of God, of a man in the sky controlling things, and the literalism of Jesus' death and resurrection. I think he's trying to play this halfway house. And, if Jordan Peterson wasn't so what he is, he would actually find a lot of value in Sanatan Dharma, because it would cater to his exact point of view.
Well, I mean, he has given lectures on. So, okay, let me also put this in context. I've met the man twice, in person. So it was twice, and one time was first in like 2018. I was in Canada. We're going to Banff, Canada, and at that airport, I was coming back home, and I saw him in the. And by the way, at this point, I only heard a little about him and knew kind of who he was. And I met him at the airport, and I just talked to him for 5 minutes. I said, you know what? I really enjoy your lectures and the stuff you put out there. It's really interesting stuff. So I thank you for that. So, that's cool. And we shook hands and whatever. And he's like, what's your name? And blah, blah. And I'm like, oh, I'm going to do a podcast too. And this was before I started Meru. It was like when Meru was still like a inkling in my head. I'm like, I'm thinking about doing a podcast. It'd be great to have you on someday. And he's like, oh yeah. He's like, once you get going, message me and we'll whatever. And then like 3 months later, I go to Iceland and I meet him in Iceland at this hot spring. He's there. I'm like, oh, Dr. Peterson. He's like, oh yeah, I remember you. And then we talked for like 15 minutes, 20 minutes. There was 2 or 3 other guys, and we just generally talking. And I was talking about, do you know much about like Hindu stuff? He's like, yeah, there's this scholar, Heinrich Zimmer. And Heinrich Zimmer is a scholar that is in the 40s or 50s, I guess. He's a pretty good scholar in Hinduism. So he actually he brought him up. He's like, oh, I read his work, but I'm not sure he knows that much about like anything Hindu, but he knows some stuff. So he was a very nice man. And this was also 2018. But he feels like he's kind of a different man today than he was. I don't know. I've never seen him since then, but it's just the feeling from what I see how he responds. Even this video in some sense, right? So we jump back into this real quick.
With an animus.
But I think that you have a reductive view of what atheism is. You've defined religion so broadly to include any sort of having aim in life, any sort of cultural archetypes, or having a metaphorical substrate. And atheism to you is a very specific type of like 3 people in the world that are these Raskolnikov type of, they want to get away with a perfect murder. It seems like you have the reductive view of what an atheist is.
Well, let's start with your claim.
Mm-hmm.
How do you define the God that you're rejecting? Like, what is God to you? You studied in the church, you found that unsatisfactory. How would you characterize what you rejected?
I think the average Christian believer, when they say that they're Christian and they believe, they mean some sort of God that is all-powerful, all-perfect, is somehow involved in the matters of this world, and that we look to them through wisdom and with the Logos incarnate in Christ. And it also seems like you don't believe in religion in the way that the average Christian says that they believe in religion. And there are as many gods out there as there are believers, because everybody has mutually exclusive and different views of what God is. So it seems
if everybody had mutually exclusive views of what God is, no one could speak to each other.
So let me just let him finish real quick. Hold on.
The mere fact of communication presumes a commonality of assumption and definition. And it's certainly not the case that I regard any archetypal manifestation whatsoever as equally religious. So that's not.
So this is where it's like, he's kind of right, but he's also kind of very wrong. Like, I can say, I love America, and you can say America's a shithole, right? We have a sense of, we're talking about this amorphous thing called America, but you might be talking about America in a particular context of economic structures. And I could be talking about America in the context of the beautiful, not just freedom, but values. Let's say geography. It's a beautiful country wide and whatever it is, right? We're both still talking about America.
Yeah.
But our definitions aren't aligning, but we can still talk about it, and we could be still talking about the same thing, but from different ways. And I feel like what he's missing here is, yes, you need, if you're going to talk particularly about something in the same manner, then you have to have a definition that aligns those two people talking to that point. Now, you could be talking about God in a more amorphous manner, and you could be talking about how you feel about God, as opposed to what God says he is or it doesn't say he is. That's a very more like, I think that's what the argument that the atheist is saying is fundamentally like everyone's view of God is different. And some people might see not all powerful, some might see like a spirit, but they're still knowingly kind of talking about something that they would agree upon, like at least conceptually, not in the details, but like something more than human beings at a very basic level.
Yes. So before we go further in this clip, I do think I agree with what you're saying. I do think he's right in the sense that there is a commonality of, and I think this is really important because when we as Hindus try to explain our religion, there is an issue of not cross-contaminating our terms with that which we would conflate it with Christian or Islamic logic, which are a little more tied with each other. When we think of God, I mean, we do have a nuanced idea of God, and we try to articulate our concept of God in a different way than the Abrahamic religions. And so finding these common terms that in different religions have like these different definitions, there is truth to what I guess the opposer is saying. I don't know his name. But then there's this ideas that which we look up to, that which we hold high in regard and we praise. There has to be something to that effect that unites different religious traditions. But then what that is that they're praising or how it's understood and its relationship with the material world, I think is there's where the differences start illuminating. But
people listening or watching, whatever, if you guys have thoughts on that, please
chime in.
Let us know. And if I know you and you want to jump on the stream just to give a point or two, let me know. I'll hop you up and then we can have a conversation.
That's not a real claim. Let me give you an example. For example, there's a sub-narrative in the story of Moses where Moses is rewarded with a glimpse of God. Okay, and that's one of the ways that God is characterized in the Old Testament stories.
Yes.
Now, Moses is a faithful servant of God and a good man. At least that's the case within the confines of the story.
One possible interpretation.
It's the case within the confines of the story, obviously.
Well, not obviously. When we look at the Bible can't precisely say anything because there are so many different exegetical and hermeneutic views of this particular book, and that everybody has agreed everybody has disagreed historically on. It seems like even the most benign detail about a book this big, and it seems like you can only say that the Bible says something if you first presuppose that it's univocal.
So your claim essentially is that Moses in the Old Testament plays the role of a villain or is irrelevant? Because the alternative...
So that's a terrible way to address what this guy's point is. This guy's simple point, and I think this goes for any religious text, by the way, or any text that's a compilation of sorts, is the Bible is a compilation. Bible is a compilation of many books by many authors and many times and many places, right? And this is where the Vedas are really cool and interesting because the Vedas themselves call the mantras a samhita, meaning fundamentally that they're a collection of different people in different times and different places having mantra drishti or having an experience of reality, right? So the Upanishads are a collection of those too. Like chapters in Upanishads are probably written by different people. And by the way, there's entire text, and now I forget the name of it, the Anukramani, I believe, the Anukramani, which lays out all the rishis that are connected to each mantra in the Veda, right? So the Veda itself assumes multivocality, meaning, so univocality means the text is saying one thing. Well, multivocality is saying the text is actually saying many things. And I think Peterson's perspective here is like, and I don't get why he doesn't understand this point. Instead, he's got to do this binary of either Moses is the hero or the villain. And that I don't think makes entire sense. You're muted, Sammy. You got to mute yourself.
I think if you actually sat Jordan down, he wouldn't want to do this. I really do believe this came out because he is inherent. This is an attitude that he came with is highly defensive and irritable. And when he said Moses being the hero of the story, the guy said, he could have been like, okay, maybe so. His point isn't diminished, by the way, by the idea that Moses is a villain or a hero of the story.
Sure.
The vocal notion of the Bible is one whole. It is so compatible with what Jordan's saying here. But I think because he's in a defensive mood and whatever, not the same Peterson that used to exist, he's lashing out, or he's pushing back on a topic that he doesn't need to, on a hill he does not need to die on. And that honestly, that's my honest opinion about this part.
Yeah,
he doesn't need to do this. He does not need to do this. He just felt defensive for a second because this guy is insulting his religion in a sense, and he's getting egotistical.
I don't think it's about insulting his religion. I think sometimes the way Peterson speaks, he thinks he's the smartest man in the room, and he thinks his interpretation of the Bible is the most meta, in the sense that, like, the traditional view or the evangelical view can fall within his view, but he has the highest truth. And I think the problem with this is you can't get to that position without understanding the language. You can't understand whether this is even what the authors were trying to do. Like, for example, again, I'll use the Hindu context. Look at the Mahabharata, right? You have a sense the Mahabharata is speaking about metta. The entire language of the text is giving you not just a story, but it's giving you the narrative of the Mahabharata as in the human battle. It's giving you the cosmic relationship of the human battle. And then it's giving you the psychological, spiritual basis for it, right? The understanding of linguistic terms connected to the concepts in Vedic worldview. It's actually being very clear that the Mahabharata is functioning at money levels in the text itself.
Yeah.
So, and I don't think the Bible does that for sure. Now, later in the New Testament, there is this foreshadowing that, well, they call it foreshadowing, but I think it's reading back into the Old Testament and rewriting the New Testament to fit those motifs in the Old Testament.
Yeah.
Alternative claim
I'm saying that we
is
can't
good.
know because we can't talk to those authors.
If you are going to start with the presupposition that there's nothing I can say about any of these stories that you're not going to disagree with from the perspective that there are multiple potential competing claims, then I can't speak with you. So
we also have a short time here, so I want to get to the core of what you're arguing here, and I'd love if we could.
The core of what I'm arguing is that atheists reject God, but they don't understand what they're rejecting. So I'm trying to give you an example of what's being rejected and its complexity. Okay, so God rewards Moses with a glimpse of the divine. So this is a definition of the God that atheists are hypothetically rejecting.
A possible one.
I said I didn't say the. I said
That is possible, yes.
Okay. So despite the fact that Moses is a stellar character and he's had a long and difficult life and can withstand a lot of difficulty and travail, God puts him between two cliffs. So he can just see a crack of what's in front of him. And when God walks by, he allows him to see his back. Okay, so the implication of that story is that the divine is fundamentally unknowable. It's a pinnacle experience, and that people in their finitude have to be shielded from a comprehensive vision of the basis of reality. Well, that's not the God that's defined in that manner, right? It's not a simple personification. It's not a simple old man in the sky. It's something that, in its essence, is unknowable and overwhelming. And that isn't, in my experience, the God that's defined by atheists who are attempting to undermine the story. I mean, it's the same.
So, I'll skip around in a bit because we don't need to go through all 120 minutes. We'll pick the areas. But my problem with this is, again, it's where does this unknowability of God come into play? Because isn't the entire Old Testament about God showing himself to his people and allowing them to know him through the relationship he's built with them?
And so my question is, I'm maybe I have an issue with the claim or what he's trying to say, but this is going nowhere. He's just telling a lesson of the story. This is a lesson that you did not consider that exists in the story of Exodus. What does this have to do with the God that they're rejecting? He's not addressing his own claim at face value of what it is. An atheistic is atheistic. It is rejecting the theism or the godhood.
Right.
What is this? He is he off tangent on his own point? He used this opportunity to tell them a lesson about Exodus that they may have not considered, and implication, not the implication, and implication. So I don't know I don't understand what his direction is. If he
Well, I think he's trying to say that the God that he's talking about is this unknowable thing, and that's the focus of his kind of engagement, and the other people don't understand that aspect of it. I think
Same claim, for example, that you're a finite creature and that you face something that in the final analysis is unknowable, and that you have to establish a relationship with it regardless of your inability to perceive or even withstand perceiving the whole. Okay, is there a problem with that?
I mean, the problem is that when we look at, famously, when you've been asked, do you believe in God? The question becomes, what do we mean by God? And in the Bible, it's not even clear the biblical authors know what God is, because Yahweh has historically emerged from an early storm god, a deity that doesn't exhaust the category of deity, and that has changed over the Old Testament. Does God have physicality? Does God not have physicality? It seems like, yes, if you define religion to mean anybody that has an aim, anybody that looks at the unknown, anybody who wants to go from chaos to order is inherently religious, then yes. But also in the same way, I could define atheist as somebody who doesn't dogmatically believe in a religion, or somebody who doesn't regularly attend religious services or belong to a denomination. To help especially the audience kind of like boil this down, there was a lot of words there. The central claim is that we exist somewhere between the finite and the infinite.
A central claim is
that we exist somewhere between the finite and the infinite.
No, I said that we were finite and we had to establish a relationship with the infinite.
Yeah, then in that case, then we're all religious, but then I can do the same thing and define one particular element of atheism. Right. It seems like we both have a reductive view of what the other side looks like, to the point where a conversation seems incoherent, and not just incoherent, but not in the way that the average Christian understands Christianity to be.
Do you have a problem?
Let's pause there. Sorry, you've been voted out by the majority.
Is he the next person there?
Hey, how's it going? Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you,
David.
David, good to see you.
Okay.
Tell me everything that you know about the Polynesian deity Lono, L-O-N-O.
Okay, let's.
I don't know anything about the Polynesian deity Lono.
So you're rejecting something without knowledge of what you're rejecting.
I'm not rejecting it. No more.
But it's not relevant to the context with constrained and guide.
All right.
I reject the concept of painting can be
Concerned with deep matters, and one of the defining characteristics of someone who's oriented in a religious direction is that they're concerned with deep matters.
Okay.
In fact, it's virtually definitional.
Right, but they also have to identify with a religious tradition and accept the foundational stories that go along
Well,
with
that would mean more that they're sectarian than that they're religious. And most people, for example, in the United States, deny that they're religious, but accept that they're spiritual.
Let's pause there. You've been voted out by the majority.
I really like.
I remember this next guy.
Yeah.
I think this next guy's pretty cool.
Hi, nice to meet you.
How are you doing?
Good, how
What's
are
your
you?
name?
I'm Greg. Nice to meet
Hi,
you.
Greg.
Okay, so I feel like you're getting at this idea of polysemy, where we have multiple related meanings for a word, right? Like, for example, a famous painting can be emotionally moving in that it changes my emotional state. And when I was on the highway coming here to the studio, I was physically moving. I was changing my position. If I said, I believe the Mona Lisa is very moving, and you said, you don't really understand what you're saying, it's nailed to the wall, I would say that you're the one who doesn't understand what I'm saying, not the other way around. And the way that relates to this is there are many concepts of God, and I'll admit, I find a lot of what you say about that interesting. I'm familiar with it. The idea of this kind of Jungian hierarchical thing, or as a metaphor, or a symbol, or the kind of, atheist, materialist, literalist idea of a agentic, omnipotent, omniscient being that intervenes in reality, right? So when I'm saying that I reject the concept of God, I'm aware of these other definitions of God, but I think that when we use words, we tend to only imply one meaning at a time. So the same way that I would say the Mona Lisa is moving emotionally, but I would not say it's moving physically. I would say I reject the concept of God in this very literal way. But
what literal way?
The way that God is this omniscient, omnipotent, agentic, supernatural being that sent his son down and has, caused miracles and all these things like that. The idea of God is
Do you think that there's an underlying unity of things?
Could you explain that question?
Well, scientists, for example, believe that...
So before we continue, what are your thoughts on this gguy's position? I mean, I think we kind of discussed it earlier,
I love the way
right?
he set it up. Yeah, I love the way he set it up. I think he's really trying to pin down Jordan, and he reframed the claim as what it should be, which is, does the supernatural being in the sky exist?
Right.
And so now Jordan says something about unity, and I want him to explain what he means by that too.
All right, let's see what his explanation of unity is here.
science unifies in a comprehensive theory? Do you, yes, no, or
I
that
know
there are
that people-
multiple competing truths? Those are the options. Either things unify or there are multiple competing truths.
I think that I know that, for example, like in physics, people are looking for like a theory of everything.
And why do you think they're doing that?
It's interesting. It's helpful.
But they
So just real quick, his argument, he's saying there's either unified truth or multiple competing truths. But why would they need to compete? Again, it's like, is my saying that my experience of the Mona Lisa is, let's say I find it disturbing versus your experience that could be it's beautiful. Is that a competing truth?
Yeah.
Or is it just an experience of a thing, right? Like within the context we have. So I think part of the problem is now when you talk about like truths, we're talking about physical truth or reality truth. It's in some sense there's a chair's there. Either you say a chair's there, it's not there, or you can say something like, well, the chair's kind of there, but we know through science that it's actually mostly empty space. And so is it really there or not? I mean, those are like, I don't know what he's trying to get to with this idea of competing truths. Unless you say there's going to be like real problems on the metaphysics of a thing. Because epistemologically, you can have different experiences and different understanding of a thing, and they can both be equally true. And maybe they're not competing with each other. They're just like, it's like saying, does blue light compete with red light? You know, like these lights that exist in the light spectrum, are they all part of light, or are they all competing lights? I mean, I don't know.
Yeah.
They also believe that there's an underlying unity to things.
In a sense, yeah. Like, I mean, like the material world and time and space are probably governed by universal laws and principles.
Partly that, yes, yes, but that the same thing might extend to a broader domain that would include imagination and value.
Could you help me connect that to the prompt?
Well, I'm trying to define God, the God that I don't think atheists do a very good job of defining. Here's another question for you. What do you think guides you in your determination of whether or not what you're...
So, but he still hasn't defined God.
Exactly. I was about to say, well, you haven't defined God.
Yeah, it's kind of like, okay, atheists haven't defined him, fine, I guess, but they're atheists as to a particular view of God.
Yeah.
Now,
But also,
I don't. Yeah,
each of the speakers have defined God, by the way. Hey, you did
Yeah, they
the
have.
first speaker, and even that middle guy does.
did.
Yeah.
he doesn't accept that position, but like, what's your alternative?
You're saying to me is true.
Can we go back? Can we stay on what we were talking about?
We are.
Okay.
You're just uncomfortable with the question.
No, I feel like you're just kind of throwing different spaghetti at the wall.
I'm not.
Okay.
I asked
All
you a
right.
very specific question. What is it that you think guides you when you're talking to me to help you determine whether what you say is true?
Logic, memory, reasoning, sensory information.
How do you distinguish that from being governed by something that's false?
An interesting question.
How do you know the difference when you speak between what's true and what's false? So you could imagine
Infer, right? I can infer. I can.
from what principles?
So, and what are you getting at?
I'm getting at the fact that your conscience guides you. Is that
Okay.
reasonable?
Conscience is defined by
Conscience.
my empathy and my reason are my foundational.
Define it any way you want.
Okay, so that's how I'm defining my conscience. Is my my conscience is my sense of
Right
and
and
wrong. Yeah, exactly.
Yes.
Yeah,
Where
yeah.
does that come from?
I would say that comes from an evolved capacity to empathize and a recognition of the benefits of engaging with and nurturing that capacity, and then that.
So, first point, I have an issue with this idea that when he first brings up this, how do you, like when you speak or whatever it is, how do you know that he's getting to the point of saying, is your speech when you speak, are you trying to be right about something or wrong about something? This idea of truth being instantiated a priori is actually a very interesting position to me, because it's a feeling, right? When I say something, I think it's true. It doesn't mean it's true.
Yeah.
I think it's true,
Exactly.
right? The truth will be determined after the fact, right? Like either through experience of some sort or more experiences, more data, so I'm not sure.
I wanted to ask you, what does Hinduism, what does the text say about that which guides us to say correct things or try to act morally, our conscience, so to speak?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because I would say for a large part of the, so let's use for example Madhvacharya. He would say is one's inherent gunas, your swabhava nature, right? Like, so he has his demarcation of sattva raja tamo for even the jivas. So based on their gunas, they're going to behave and believe in the things that connect to that. So what they will be true. So a perspective I would take is if you take a Sankhyan view, then the thoughts that the Atma experiences are determined by the constitutive elements of the body and mind and ego. And those things are composed of the gunas, and they have predominances, and they're causally fixed, right? There's a lot of subconscious stuff going on. So when you say something like, I don't know if people have stopped to think, like, even when I'm saying, I don't know what the hell I'm saying, right? I'm not choosing these words. They're kind of just coming and I'm just saying them. And if you really just stop and think about like what you're saying, you're not saying it consciously. I'm not like, well, I'm going to say I am is whatever. It's just flowing through and it's being said.
Right.
I don't know if you get what I mean by that.
Yeah, no, I do. It's like it's flowing through. There isn't ultimately what you're saying is that unlike what Peterson's trying to allude to, it isn't some external omniscient force that's guiding your actions and thoughts and what you perceive to be right.
Yeah, I mean, what I'm saying, what I think he's going to connect it to conscience is God, or I don't know, like either is God or somehow a quality of God or something of that nature, or an characteristic of God. So your conscience is a quality that God gives you, or something like that. I'm sure
that's what he's going to say. That's a Christian idea, right? The law is written in your hearts,
right?
So,
but the thing is, the law isn't written into psychopaths. I mean, like many people just don't have that same sense of right and wrong. So are we going to say to them that God isn't in them? I mean, that's like a interesting position to take. Are we going to say that, for example, animals, like when you kill an animal or eat an animal, there's no conscience there? Or if you view like, I mean, here's a funny part to think about this true. Like generals will send their, like their men to go kill other men, and they know there's death going to happen, and probably whole lot of issues. Are they also being impelled by God to do these actions by the conscience? I don't know. I mean, this is where it's like he's got to grapple with that, and I don't know if he does that.
And that empathy is constrained and guided by reason, right? Like, for example, I am driving down the highway. There's a kitten in the road. I'm going to empathetically feel, oh my God, I want to save the kitten. But then reasonably, like, I'm going to get hit by a car, right? So that's sort of the process through which I make ethical decisions.
Okay, how do you
constrained by reason?
Do you think that people can differ in their response to something empathically?
Yeah.
Is there a mediating principle that can tell you one person who's empathic and another person who's empathic that disagree, who's correct?
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, I think that's where we'd have to, talk it out, right? Mm-hmm. We do that in real life all the time when we have, whether that's a discussion with a friend about the right thing to do in a situation, whether that's a policy discussion about law, right? That's where we can converse with each other, think about things, explain our perspectives, and then kind of reach a conclusion, right? I think that we do that all the time.
So Elijah, the prophet Elijah, defined God in the Old Testament as the voice of conscience within. Okay. That's a definition.
So you're saying by that definition of God, I see. This is kind of goes back to what I'm saying initially.
I'm not defining it. Elijah defined it.
Okay, so as Elijah defines God,
it's defined that way in Jonah too.
Okay, so as
Cardinal Newman also defined it that way.
As I'm sure you know many people who defined it that way, and it's impressive. You're a very knowledgeable person.
I'm not trying to be impressive. I'm just pointing out to you how God is defined in the Old Testament.
All right. So to respond to that, I do think there are lots of interesting ways to define God. And that goes back to my kind of opening
Then how
statement.
do we specify what we're arguing about?
We use context clues, again, it goes back to my example of the Mona Lisa.
I'm defining God as conscience.
Okay, so that's interesting, but then you're kind of expanding the meaning of God.
No, I'm not. That's how it's defined in the Old Testament.
Okay, so
Elijah and.
So now it's like cherry picked. Okay, you pick one definition of God is conscience, but is that what we see through the Old Testament?
No, is it the same conscience that sends the plagues down in Egypt? Is it the same one who tells David to slaughter the Amalekites? Like, it's not just conscience. This is an entity that's giving revelation to various prophets.
Right, and I think this is where it's like I think you're just making this up. I get that Elijah said that and Jonah said that, and then we can go read the context in which Elijah said God is conscience, but maybe but it's a particular type of conscience because God apparently told people that in your conscience you shouldn't worship other gods besides Him. I don't know if that's
part of it, yeah. Because so many cultures have done it. So
yeah,
where's that? Where's conscience? Yeah, I don't know.
Right. So I think the problem is it's such a loose term. Again,
you know what it has to do with? It's the multivocality of the Old Testament, which is defining God in different philosophical ways because there were just thinking people. And he's cherry-picked one of those definitions from a multivocal book, applying it to the entire Bible, and then telling people, atheists, that that's what they're rejecting, and not the other more mainstream perspectives that are offered. Actually,
this is a good Praying brings up a point. This is random, but it's interesting that Peterson focused on the Old Testament more than the New Testament. I mean, so far, yes. I don't know if we should get to it, but I don't know if he talks about the New Testament much. Because right now he's really exploring the Old Testament. I think he does talk about some element of the New Testament, but I think we'll get to that. His focus is really on the Old Testament and unknowability of God right now. So let's see what that is. Okay.
In Jonah.
Sure. So whoever.
It's not whoever. Okay. Elijah is one of the major Old Testament prophets. Right? He's equal in stature to Moses.
Okay.
So it's not arbitrary.
All right. So that is interesting. But it's not relevant to the context with which I am using the term God.
It's directly relevant. Atheists reject God, but they don't understand what they're rejecting. You accept conscience as a guide, and conscience is one of the defining characteristics of God in the Old Testament.
I think you're being intellectually disingenuous.
In what way?
Because again,
I asked you if you believe that conscience guided you.
You just asked me a question, and then you stopped me from answering it. In this setting, you understand the way I am using the term God and belief.
Not in the least. I don't understand how you're using it.
He's not letting him finish.
But I mean,
why is he not letting him complete an answer?
But this is where it's I think he can't. He's either abstracting the conversation way too much to be so obtuse so that he can dilly dally around these points, or he's a smart guy. He has to know when I say, well, I don't believe in. Everyone's been saying this: omnipotent, omniscient, personal being that does these things. They don't believe in that, but he's saying you're rejecting the idea of God because you don't understand God. And I'm like, well, they do. They just don't. They don't think your response or your definition makes much sense to them, at least in this context of the Bible.
That's why I'm trying to define it. My definition of God as conscience is a lot more precise and oriented than your definition of the God that you.
So is it? I mean, hold on. Is it precise and oriented? I mean, it is, but is that the only definition of God? Is the question. He's saying if he's saying precise, then that term, God as conscience, must possess enough work that the word conscience does to kind of overshadow any other definition that you might want to put to it. And I don't think that's true.
He's playing. I don't know if he's doing this is what he's trying to do, but it's almost like he's saying God is conscience, is your conscience. If you reject the idea of a conscience, you're rejecting God. Most atheists do, and therefore they do secretly believe in God. That's
well they don't reject conscience, right?
Exactly.
They might say,
yeah.
They might say something like conscience is a product of evolution, it's a product of culture, upbringing, But then, I mean, it's very interesting. Okay, next one.
But it's irrelevant to the fault lines of this debate.
How is it irrelevant?
Because in common parlance, when we're talking about atheists, God, belief, not belief,
I don't care about common parlance. I'm trying to get to something fundamental.
I think your point is irrelevant to the way that people tend to use these words. Your point that there are these polysemous
I didn't
ideas
make that point.
God.
You did.
I
made a specific point that God was associated with conscience.
I just feel like you kind of retreat into the semantic fog.
I'm not retreating at all. I'm advancing, sir. You are retreating.
Well, it was very nice.
It's just it cracks me up. It's like, well, first of all, he's very loose. You could be either he in one sense he says God is conscience. In another sense, he says God conscience is a characteristic of God. So, I don't know if he understands the logical problem there is, oh, it could be both, by the way, but what if God is conscience, then you're making it identity. You're saying it's the same thing. So if one person's conscience is different than another person's conscience, then you have two gods or multiple gods at that point. If you make the identity, right? If you make the identity claim. Now, if you say conscience is a quality of God, then you could be like, well, God possesses consciousness or conscience in which he has given all beings that same conscience that he possesses. Then, which would then be like, well, then right or wrong, good, bad, whatever is built into human beings from that shared characteristic of conscience. Yeah, go ahead.
By the way, if I know my New Testament, which references Elijah quite a bit, I think when Elijah even says that God is conscience, he is saying that him being a prophet, a representative, an angel.
He's Old Testament, by the way. He's not New Testament, Elijah.
No, he's referenced in the New Testament.
Oh, yeah. He's definitely referenced. Yeah.
Yeah, right. You know, John the Baptist being the second coming of Elijah. It's like whatever. Point is that you have this idea of God being a divine prophets being a divine representative. If Elijah is saying God is conscience, or God is my conscience, he is most likely, and I have to go read those things, but the context. He is saying something to the effect that my right and wrong is governed by God, the law, the Judaic law. And he is not at all saying it's some like intrinsic biological thing. It's no, I'm here as a prophet for mankind. Therefore, my conscience, my right and wrong is aligned with God's right and wrong.
Right.
Which is what's written in the law. And I think Jordan or Mr. Peterson is extracting that to making it some like fundamental idea of anybody's right and wrong.
Yeah. So on that point, it's interesting because this same point, in the Hindu context, like let's just use the Gita, Krishna says, like Ishvara Sarva Bhutaram Hrideshu Arjunatishli, right? Like all beings are I'm situated in the hearts of all beings, spinning them around as if they're like a yantra, which is like a machine or some sort of instrument. It's interesting he says that because that includes good people, bad people, good actions, bad actions, right? But at the same point, this idea that Krishna is the inner controller, the antaryami, the one that pushes, impels people to do the actions they choose, good, bad, right, wrong, all those things. But at the same time, in Gita, Krishna also says, I do karma as an example for everyone else, right? I don't have to do any of this. I take these actions, I do these things because I'm giving examples for people to follow. This is a line that Yatyata Chariti Shreshtaha Tattadeve Itaro Janaha, right? Whatever great people do, other people follow. And I think the difference in this argument is Krishna's is the all, meaning the good and bad conscience you have, he is beyond those things. He's moving people along in this lila, this game, this enterprise of existence in this world, but he is beyond the good and evil of this stuff. And so is the Atma, right? And this is, I think, the difference between some sense the Christian worldview that there's this pure antagonistic force, there's this pure good force, and ever so they clash, but you have no sense where antagonistic force comes from. Because there's issues around that in the Theodicy.
Yeah.
Very nice to meet you. I
Nice to meet
appreciate the
you too.
conversation.
Yeah. It's very brave of you to do this.
Yes.
Surrounded is now a
don't care about the morality
podcast,
of
available wherever you
By the
listen.
way-
Search Surrounded, plug in, and stay part of the
He's going to be
conversation.
the nicest
Anywhere,
person in Jordan,
anytime.
and everyone else is going to be very savage. So
My next claim is that morality and purpose,
I think this
all
guy
of Catholic social.
So this guy doesn't think that.
is this Parker?
How you doing?
Real quick,
Nice to meet you.
I guess since you said morality and
fun
purpose,
fact, I know
Yeah.
him. He used to follow me, but then his account got deleted off TikTok, and so his new
this
account
guy?
involved me. Yeah, I know him pretty well. I've talked to him a couple times. I've talked to him and Danny, and hopefully you'll be able to cover Danny's clips. But
Yeah.
they're cool people. Parker is very famous on TikTok now. I knew him before
Nice.
he was famous. Yeah.
Nice.
be found in science. It would just depend on like what you're referencing. If you're saying a description of your psychological preferences would be considered within science, sure. But I don't think that you have to say that it comes from science in order to be like an atheist. As an agnostic atheist, I don't know if God exists and I don't believe that a God exists. And the only ones that I would really reject would be like the all-knowing, all-powerful.
real quick for everyone, this claim is morality and purpose can't be found within science. So this is the particular claim that Jordan Peterson's staking.
All good, perfect notion of God that plenty of Christians like prescribe themselves. So I guess
How is that relevant to this claim?
you're basing a position of morality and purpose in some like notion of God that isn't the same type of notion of God that typical Christians would prescribe. Your notion of God is
What typical Christians?
yeah. Typically, when I talk to Christians, they say that they believe in an
How
all-knowing.
about Cardinal Newman, who defined God as conscience? He was a major influence on all of Catholic social theory. How about that Christian?
Sure. So do you believe in the all-knowing, all-powerful, all-good notion of God?
What do you mean by believe?
Do you think it to be true?
That's the circular definition. What do you mean
How
when
is
you
that
say you
circular?
believe?
How is that circular?
Because you added no content to the answer by substituting the word true and believe.
I said you think it to be true.
All right. So if you believe something, you stake your life on it.
What do you mean by that?
You live for it and you die for it. That's what I mean by that. It isn't something that you say. It isn't something that's associated with logical consistency. It's not declarative. It's not propositional. It's not a figment of your imagination. It's the presupposition of your attention and your action. And you're either fragmented, in which case you worship multiple gods, or there's some unity at the bottom of it that makes you an unstoppable force.
Okay, so you're saying that you don't believe something if you wouldn't die for it? Is
No,
that
really, no.
Okay. So then,
How would you define belief? Something you say?
Can I explain? Like, I could believe it is the case that this pen exists, but if someone like threatened my life, right, I would lie in order to be able to save my life, right? Like, I think you would do that too. You wouldn't lie to save your
Don't be
life.
so sure.
You wouldn't lie to save your life.
How much do you know about me? I didn't lie to save my career. I didn't lie to.
Yeah, so that's I mean, his second point about all this is how much you know about me. Put that aside. I think that's like an ego push. But this idea that belief is something you live and die by. No, it's how you function in the world, and your beliefs can change. So, like for example, there's a sense like I believe that the atoms between all things are, like a truck coming by me, its atoms are it's mostly made of space. I believe that based on, let's say, science inference, whatever it is. But I'm not going to behave like I believe that, because I also know there's other elements, like, for example, the forces that keep those things together, forces. That if it hits me, I'm dead. So you can believe something to be true and not also behave in a way that you stake your life on it. Because, again, I think the problem is, like, this is the same thing of this idea of paramarthik vyavaharik, right? You might know that you're Brahman or this idea, but you're attached to this level of, the existence of life, right? This attachment doesn't mean you don't know this. You might not. So we
operate as if we're in duality, even if we know non-duality.
Correct, because that is the nature of the world, right? And so once you're beyond that, that's a different story. And maybe that's what he's saying when he says it's not propositional, it's not declarative. Maybe he means intuitive, but the word belief by its very term is different from. So I might believe that there is Advaita, but I don't know it.
Yeah,
I guess the difference between belief and knowledge is the big part. By knowledge, you live by knowledge because you know something. You don't believe something. Like, I know it to be true that if I plunge a knife in my chest, I will die. That I know to be true. I don't believe it's true. I know it to be true, right? I think this is also the idea of belief and knowledge might be different. But again, this goes back to what Prem said, what do you mean by believe? And that's a fair question. So MJJB SK Fanatic. This stake your life on it point is what I meant by their ideal trumping everything else. Sure. Yeah, they stake their eternal life on it, not their immediate life. So that's for evangelical Christians or hardcore Christians that way.
To save my clinical practice.
Would you lie to like save your children, your mom, your dad?
I don't think lying would save them.
Can there ever be a circumstance logically that lying could save someone?
Yeah, and if you're steeped in sin, you're likely to live in circumstances like that.
I'll give you an example. If you're like in like Nazi Germany, and it is the case that there's like Jewish people in your attic and you're trying to
know
protect
the
them,
example.
would you lie to like the Nazis? if
I
they're
would have done
asking?
everything I bloody well could, so I wouldn't be in that situation
you
to begin
lie?
with. It's a hypothetical, and it's
You
not.
So first of all, batshit crazy response. Even if you do everything you can do in your life to be perfect in this moral framework, the world doesn't work that way around you. So you can be a good man in a terrible situation and have to make bad choices or terrible choices. I don't get his I will never be in this situation like position. It just
He's just saying stuff. I think he's fully locked in his own ego and just blabbering to save face. And it's only making him look worse and worse and worse. I don't know what he's doing. This is
right.
This is crazy.
But this is also the guy that earlier would say there's a hierarchy of values. So if there's a hierarchy of values, then you're going to at some point have two values hit.
Right. And now he's so fundamental or deontological where lying is like the worst thing you do than giving up people.
Right.
Or like if you ever find yourself in a situation, it's because you're steeped in sin. That's he's just, I mean, whatever. It's not really worth like commentating on. I think he's just I don't know what he's going through.
I think it's worth insofar as to say that this is, I think, somewhat of a problematic view that somehow you can act your way out of sin. In that if you align to this moral principle that he's postulating, you'll never be in a situation where you're going to make these choices. Now, maybe he doesn't seem to get when he didn't lie about his career choice or whatever he said in Canada, and he lost all his money. Maybe his wife and children couldn't have been fed. Now he's still going to have to make the determination at that point. But the problem is he's not accepting that you will have a conflict. He's just saying you live this way, there's no conflict. As if the conflict only arises when you're living in sin. And I find that to be disassociated with the reality of life.
Most definitely.
Not
Answer
answerable.
hypotheticals?
No, I can't answer a hypothetical like
What?
that because
Did
it's
you eat
far.
today?
Look,
Did you
don't
eat
play
today?
games.
I'm not playing games. I'm just
Yes,
asking
you
if
are.
you ate it.
If you present me with an intractable moral choice that's stripped of context and you back me into a corner, you're playing game. I just told you
Hypothetical.
I would do everything that I could to make sure that I'm never in that situation. By the time you've got there, you've made so many mistakes that there's nothing you can do that isn't a sin.
Being born in Nazi Germany and trying to protect people that you care about. Like there could be a Jewish friend that you have and you want to protect them.
I think you should
have
just
them in
give
your
up on
attic.
that line of questioning.
Give up on just like trying to clarify your position? Because you
I
don't
did
like, are you like
clarify.
uncomfortable with me asking this question? It's just a basic hypothetical. Like I could ask you.
It's just a basic hypothetical where you put Jews' lives at stake in Nazi Germany. That's just a basic hypothetical.
Obviously, you would lie in that scenario to save their life, but you're like not trying to answer this question for some reason.
I just told you why.
Are you anti-fascist? Like, so you're
Why are
anti-fascist?
you asking that?
I was just asking, just clarifying. But like, okay, again, you're not answering this hypothetical because you know it shows that you clearly would lie to save
I'm
someone's life.
answering it in
Obviously,
a
that's
manner
not
you
what truth
don't
is.
find acceptable.
Obviously, because I care about
you're-
truth.
I wouldn't be in that scenario.
Obviously, right? Logically, because that's
No.
already happened. Like that's in the past. You don't have a time travel device. We're bringing this logical hypothetical.
So this is hilarious to me for a couple of reasons. Is he wouldn't be in that scenario. Okay, so let's put this. So let's use example. In the Mahabharata, Krishna tells this story to Arjuna, where he talks about this rishi who goes to the forest to meditate, takes a vow of truth telling. Let's say it's like Jordan Peterson. Jordan Peterson goes into the forest because he's a truth teller, hardcore truth teller. He promised to always tell the truth, and then as he's meditating and engaging in the forest and doing his ascetic practice, a family runs by and says, "Oh, we're being chased by bandits. Don't tell them where we're going. They're going to kill us." They run by, and the bandits come, and they say to the rishi, "If you don't tell us where they went, we'll kill you." And he doesn't care about his life, but he just says, "Oh, they went this way, and they went and killed them." Now he suffers the consequences of that action. Why? Because he chose one dharma over the other, the dharma of truth telling versus the dharma of protection, not ahimsa, nirsham, which is non-violence and non-cruelty. But the rishi didn't put himself in that situation. He was just sitting there meditating. The situation occurs around him. And in that context of the situation occurring around him, he has to make a moral choice. So even if you do everything right around you, like I said before, the moral choice will always will come your way at some point, right? Like I'm sure he makes moral choices every day. He eats meat. He's actually a ravaged meat eater. He eats like meat for every meal, and he eats meat in the sense of like to the exclusion of everything else. And I'm not saying meat eating is wrong. I think it causes violence, but the point is you are constantly choosing your life versus someone else's. You are committing himself.
Yeah.
The moral conflict will arise.
I'm gonna address what Vaishnava Pro was saying. I don't think he's not jumping from divine belief to hypothetical question. He is
okay. Hold on. Let's put this up.
Oh yeah. Okay.
Vaishnava Pro.
Yeah. He says talk about something. The other guy is jumping goalposts too. He goes from divine belief to hypothetical questions, which has no relevance to the topic but to divert. I disagree. I think he found himself in this. I don't think he wants to do this, but he's going into this hypothetical question to reject Jordan Peterson's definition of debate, stake your life on. It's just such a silly.
So Vaishnava Pro, I'll say this is like, yeah, he I don't think he was jumping goalposts. Peterson's been showing consistently he jumps the goalposts. He changes the wording, and you saw the logical progression of this guy. He's simply making the claim that belief doesn't mean you stake your life on it. So the question he didn't jump to is, if you are in a situation where you believe truth, because Peterson's saying telling the truth is like the highest ideal, or being truthful is the highest ideal. In this situation, if you truly believe it, would you lie? And because Peterson doesn't want to say he would lie, therefore undermine his position that if you believe in something, you're willing to stake your life in it because he believes in truth telling, he's fundamentally not going to answer that question. So I think this guy did a great point of showing the contradiction in Peterson's own philosophical or moral underpinnings. Because again, he hasn't defined his hierarchy. He's not saying for him, he's truth telling seems to be the highest moral good in the world. Whereas I think when the Hindu context, this is why Mahabharata is very, very clear. Ahimsa, Anirsham Share is the highest moral value. So in order to prevent cruelty and violence, you can lie. You'll still suffer the consequences of that lie, but you can lie. For Peterson, I think the highest level is about truth telling, no matter what. And I think it's not to say, I tend to think that nonviolence or not hurting or non-cruelty is a higher moral goal, but I'm not going to say that this moral goal is a bad one or one that one shouldn't employ. I just think that in the hierarchy of moral values, I think, nonviolence and Anirsham are higher. Again, that's not based upon any reasonable or logical reasoning. I'm getting there because the Shastra says it. And I agree with that particular position. You have any comment to that?
No, I think I'm learning from what you're saying. So I'm going to keep it to what you're saying. I don't want to, I don't know what else.
You can push back if you don't agree. You can tell me I'm wrong.
No. I'm listening. Okay. Yeah.
I like this comment by Abbas, the alchemist. Peterson solved the problem of evil. Just make the right decisions. You never encounter evil or suffering.
I didn't see that in context. I was like, Abbas, what are you talking about? And then I just saw the first one, and I'm like, okay.
Yeah, but that's basically what he's saying. It's true. He's saying just make the right decisions, and you have no evil. Yeah. Fair enough.
In light of your Rishi example, this makes it 10 times funnier. Yeah.
To show you that in some circumstances that do happen within the real world, you would lie to save people's lives. So your definition of truth isn't actually how we're typically using it. So what you're trying to do is you're trying to muddy the waters when I ask you, like, do you believe this? Do you think this to be true? So you don't actually have to answer the questions. And plenty of Christians don't like that because they clearly see that you don't really want to be associated with Christianity.
I can imagine that I was in a situation where the best I could do as a consequence of my previous mistakes was to tell the least amount of lie I could manage. Okay, but that would likely indicate that I had made all sorts of catastrophic errors on my way there.
So you would lie to save someone's life. So again, you do believe it to be true in that circumstance, even though you lied in that scenario. So
not without the context that I put it in.
You were not willing to die for it. You were not willing to let other people die for it. So that's not what you see to be true then, seemingly.
You're doing exactly what I said you were doing at the beginning of the conversation. You're generating an impossible, restricted, hypothetical with no precursors to back me into a
How's
corner.
it possible? Is there something contradictory about it? Nice to meet you.
Yeah, nice to meet you. Yeah.
And this again is a problem. I think impossible. What he means by that is, my guess is an impossible moral problem, and that's true. We every day in life come to a position where, not every day, but a lot of times we come to impossible moral determinations. And as much as people don't want to admit this, is a lot of moral determination is really consequentialism. Like, the action sometimes is not as important as the consequence, but because we don't know the consequence, we have to make some assumptions in our decision making.
Yeah.
And I think that the position Peterson's taking is as if you can have this vast amount of data that will give you more and more clarity as to what decision or what the right action is. And I don't think that's true. Is sometimes we're just behind the curtain and we don't know what's going on the other side, but we have to figure out what to do. And we do that based upon, part of this is going to be the value that we believe in reciprocity, right? At some level, I want to be, if more people are non-cruel, and I do that non-cruelty, maybe that passes on and it builds a better world or something of that nature. But I do think that at some level, like, you can't separate moral values from a context and from a world you live in.
Yeah.
Right. If you hold absolute positions on things, then I don't see how you can make that moral value work in the world.
Yeah. Yeah. He's living in a fantasy, and I don't know. I really don't. It's hard for me to talk about this because always I try to understand the perspective, and then here's the faulty perspective. I can't even begin to understand what the logic of Peterson is at this point, or what is his goal here? He's making absurd claims, and I don't know, expecting people to just like fall in line with it, where this like evades all common sense.
Well,
No one really believes that as long as you act righteously, you'll never find yourself in a situation where you would never have to lie.
Well, I think some people do. I mean, I do think that some people believe like this idea that, and I don't want to be like horrible about this. Like, let's use an example of a woman going home late at night from work or whatever, and then she has something horrendous happen to her, or she wears a certain outfit that has something horrendous happen to her. The question then is like, well, you shouldn't have done that now, or you shouldn't be out that late because you made a series of bad decisions to make you make a choice to wear a dress that other men will find revealing or whatever it is. Yeah. Now, there can be a practical truth that it would impel certain men to behave terribly, like more terribly. But these men would have already found a reason, I think, to behave terribly anyway. So the question I think that rises in my head is, what if that's a perspective that he's coming with? And I think he's explained this constant personal responsibility throughout much of his career and his books and writing, is then you have led yourself to this position at the end of the day. I mean, I'm not saying there's no causal chain effect here, but I am saying his position is almost like 100% certain when you don't know it, right? He's just saying if you do the right things, you'll never be in a bad situation. And I don't know. I don't think that's true. Shepherd Ill, the topic. What's the topic here? We just finished his claim number 2, morality and purpose can't be found within science. So let's see. This next lady I think is really good. So let's continue here.
My next claim is that everybody worships something, including atheists, even though they might not know it.
This one's interesting.
Hi.
Good work.
Thank you.
Hi there.
I'm Zena. So I want to start off with defining terms.
Yep.
How do you define worship?
Prioritize.
prioritize. So almost like having a preference over something other than the
It's a
other.
hierarchy of preferences.
Yeah.
And you use it to direct your attention.
Right.
So whatever you're attending to, you're worshiping.
Right.
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead. Sandy.
How he takes highly connotatively religious words and then makes them as mundane as prioritize. Think everyday words. Oh, if you prioritize something, you worship. And if you worship, that means
Right.
you have
Yeah.
I don't know, man. I don't know what one is supposed to work with what he's saying. I prioritize too. I didn't know that. I prioritized my homework when I was in school.
You worship it. You worship your homework, right?
I worshipped it. I didn't know that. I prioritize it like I prioritize God.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think it is a weird thing because prioritization depends on context again. You know, like, I don't know. Like, you know, like sometimes you might prioritize like your wife, other times you prioritize your work, depending upon what is more important in that moment. So again, I don't know if that's worship anyway. It doesn't mean you worship work.
It's not worship.
It just,
This is
yeah.
this is we're in the kooky territory right now.
The Peterson world.
Right.
Yeah.
So I've kind of become a little bit familiar with your idea of like this value-laden hierarchy,
Yeah.
right? And you kind of posit that at the bottom of this hierarchy, or you call it top or bottom, I
Yeah,
suppose.
right.
At the bottom of this hierarchy, this foundational priority in your life is going to be considered God.
That's
is that
right.
correct?
Yes.
Right. I'm trying to imagine a situation in which could there be that someone has a priority at their foundation that is different from someone else's?
Oh, definitely.
Right. So we can have different conceptions of God.
That's why we fight.
Right. So essentially, there's not one God, but there are multiple gods, and these gods exist in some realm of truth. It's true that this person has one God and it exists.
Yeah, probably better to think about it as multiple values, but that there's a hierarchy of values with something at the bottom.
Right. But at the
Or
bottom is
top.
God, and there
That's
are
a definition, yeah.
Yeah. So at the bottom is God, and
Yeah.
there can be multiple people with different conceptions of God, and they're each valid in being called God. So there are multiple gods that exist.
It depends
Yeah,
on what
she's
you mean
right.
by valid. So far, so good, but it depends on what you mean by valid, because I would say that some foundational conceptions don't play out when they're implemented. So if you put the wrong thing at the foundation, you end up in hell, for example. That's what happens in totalitarian states.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you're saying
So they're not all equal. Like all foundational principles are not equal, even though
Right.
they might be equally foundation. Right?
So what makes one kind of foundation?
Okay. So his argument is fundamentally this: is whatever you find to be the most grounding truth in your life or priority, the highest of all ultimate priorities, that is God. So, and sure, her point is they can have different definitions. Like, for example, like we just talked about, my priority could be nonviolence. Therefore, I become super vegan and super, a Jaina, right? Let's just say that way. His priority is truth. So this truth, telling truth. So telling the truth becomes his God. So truth becomes God, nonviolence becomes God, and then someone else's priority is, let's say, caring for family first. That's their highest priority. They'll do everything for their blood. That becomes a sort of God to them too. So and I think she makes a good point here, which is basically that these are all different gods then. It's based on his definition. They're all different. Now they're getting into, because she said their word valid, I think now they're getting into this idea of what is a valid God? Meaning, again, now you go back to the issue that we talked about before. What is a good value? What is a good foundation? And how do you determine that? And again, I don't know. And he's going to give an answer, I think, but it's going to be consequentialist.
Foundational tenet like better than another one?
That's an excellent question. Iterability. Imagine that you play a game with someone and you're a kid, and it's fun. So then you play again and again and again.
So repetition.
It's playability across multiple iterations. So then you have a friend, and a friend is better than having a game, right? So that's one. Breadth of application is another. So if it's just for me now, it's not as good as something that would be benefit to both of us across time.
Right. So we're explaining like characteristics that can be applied to like these types of like foundational values. But why is it that this iterability makes it better? And what does better mean?
Well, one hallmark of better is likely to be selected voluntarily. So it's invitation.
So how is that a moral?
He's being secular. He's just saying like, okay, if it's conducive for society, it brings benefits. The other one, what he said is a breadth of people. If it benefits the most people, he's just saying utilitarianism in a sense. he's bringing in these ideas and then just reframing it as like godly values.
Right.
I mean, I guess in the Hindu context, it could be argued that way.
I mean, I just think about it in the first place because it is like the example he uses is a game you play again and again and again, and it's Leela. At some level, like this world is enticing enough for people to want coming back in and keep doing this game. So I guess from the Hindu perspective, fair point, but that's also not the ultimate truth for Hindus, right? It is a truth that is a second order duration from Brahman or Ishvara, but it's still a truth. Now, and that's a fair point because then that becomes this Leela, this game that becomes that you keep wanting to play because you're playing between Sukha Dukkha and the people that desire more Sukha go a certain way. But again, their Sukha might be different from everyone else's Sukha, right? It could be violence and they go down that path. And so I don't think he answers the question still foundationally. Why is something foundationally good better than the other? He's making a claim about the consequentialist element, which, I mean, I guess it's fair, but how do you know that it's good until you see it play out completely? So at any given point, we're only seeing a particular point of it, right? Like maybe the case is, and I'm making a terrible argument here, but like maybe the case is like me beating my kids is going to build 10 generations down Gandhi. So is it worth beating my kids? I mean, that's the problem. I'm like, where does this thing lead to?
Yeah. He wants his cake and eat it too. He wants to have the perspective of objectivity, but he's giving ultimately what you're saying is suggesting it is subjective values that you could weigh either way. This criterion isn't like algorithmic, as in it gives you an answer for every situation. These are just ultimately up to your conscience and your ideas.
Right, but I would say that it doesn't necessarily need to be well, it could be algorithmic at a universal scale, and we just don't know it. And we're like groping in the dark.
Yeah, but I'm saying with his particular criterion, as she said, what makes one value better than the other, that does not suffice on giving an algorithmic roadmap of every possible situation, what the right thing to do is.
Right.
The descriptive kind of quality. So we're talking about characteristics that in some type of system with a goal, an output being like, we could maybe say happiness, right? Or some type of
harmony.
Harmony.
Yeah,
right?
that's better. Not happiness precisely because it's too short term.
Exactly. So as someone who is an atheist, right, I can explain that within a system, there are things that we can see as better or worse to meet this goal or meet this output. But what we're interested in, though, is what could make these things, regardless of any system, right?
Well, imagine that you set up a system and you implement it and it produces the opposite results to which you intend. Well, yeah, that's not a good system.
Exactly.
Right, so the foundational principles are lacking because when you implement them, the game degenerates instead of moving towards the aim.
Right, so we're talking about within a system. When we talk about something being moral.
So again, this is where it's like interesting because the game can degenerate, meaning at some point it was good and then degenerated. So it's the flowation of time, but it could also regenerate too. So the question I have here is like, what does he mean by any of this? Like a system, by the very term, is self-contained, right? It can flow on its own, go ahead on its own. Like capitalism is a system at some level, which provides certain values and goods and benefits, but it also has byproducts and wastes, like anything does. So is he saying like the Leibniz kind of the best of all possible worlds kind of thing here? Again, which is I don't know how you build a value system from a point of not knowing the end already.
Right.
Does anyone in the audience have any thoughts on this? If you do, throw it up. We will discuss it.
Yeah.
All right.
Moral, right? Just absolutely moral. It means that without a system, right, this thing is simply moral with no reason. Like stands independent, this thing is good. So I'm trying to figure out if such thing can exist. And if so, do you believe that these things are moral in of themselves, like self-evidently moral, or are they moral in accordance with the system?
I can't define them any more accurately than I already did, really.
Okay. In regards to morality, when we talk about the divine, when we talk about God and religion, these moral tenets and religion, right, and God exist as good because it is God, right? So it's self-evident, right? Without any kind of goal or output, this thing is good. So I want to figure out how.
There's an element of that that's true. So, for example, In the story of Job, Job is unfairly tortured in consequence of a bet between God and Satan. And so Job is emblematic of someone who's being hurt for no apparent reason. Okay, so Job's response to that is that he refuses to lose faith in himself, and he refuses to lose faith in the ultimate goodness of being. Okay, and those are axiomatic decisions. They're not exactly evidence dependent because he is suffering. There's an arbitrariness in that that's reminiscent of what you claim.
So I'm essentially trying to figure out,
So this again is where it's like, well, no, there's no arbitrariness in that. The point that Job sticks to his guns is because he believes, and it goes back to his point. He believes in this God, and God's going to take care of him, which eventually the God does. But like, he gives him a second family. I mean, like, it's like saying, you know, like you have a kid, and I killed the kid, but I'm like, you know what? I'm gonna give you another kid. Is that going to even that's a whole nother like issue. But on this point, and she's exactly right on this, is you're judging, like I was saying earlier, you're judging what is valuable based upon what the outcome of the system is.
Yeah.
Not from first principles here. And maybe the problem for him, he's got to figure out how he's going to derive those first principles. And at some level, if he says you could reason to it, then, you know, I don't know how one can, because you could reason to something and reason back out of it. And you have to start with something foundational that you just accept a priori in some regards. I mean, that's generally how I approach it, is like a good is good is a value only within the fact that it's given to you by some other means. It's outside the system that's brought into a system, and then the system flows from it, right? Like, but for us human beings, and that's my metaphysical view, but like for us human beings, we can't know it. Our epistemology is we can't know what that good is. We just don't know. We can't know through reasoning what that good is, because reasoning in many ways can get us out of that good too. Because I give you examples, so you got to have a framework for that idea to work, and I think that's where the Shastras come in. And the Shastras can give you why is ahimsa better than, you know, truth telling, or why practices yamas and niyamas. You know, why is, you know, asatyena, which is like, you know, like like non-stealing. Why is that important? I mean, it gives you these values for purposes of cultivation of what? Of your atma. So it's saying these values, while they're tangentially beneficial for the world, the purpose for them is to free oneself.
Yeah. Right.
do you believe that something can be good, like stance independently, something that can be good?
I don't know what you mean by stance independent.
Okay, so
you
I mean
independent of people?
Independent of people. We can use that, or more so, I want to be more specific. Something that can be good, right, regardless of any end goal. It's just good.
No, I think good is tied up with goal.
Goal, okay.
Then he's a consequentialist.
Yeah. I mean, that's what I said, right? It has tied up with goal. And in some sense, that is true, right? Because in some sense, it's absolutely true. Like, if your goal is wealth, then you build a value system that gets you to wealth, or maybe no value system. But the question is, like, is there something even that regulates even that?
So as a Christian, and he's just getting away from this, is that they say that anything in line with God is good, and that is the independent. I mean, Christianity does hold to that. God is independent of these things.
The youthful dilemma doesn't go away.
Yeah.
I mean, at the end of the day, because is good different from God?
Is good different from God? No, not in the Christian perspective. No.
So the idea is anything God does is good.
Yeah.
But what if he says something and does something different?
It's good.
Both are good.
Both are good. You know, it's a head scratcher.
So where's your objective morality then? I mean, that's the point. If you're going to make that argument, it's like, okay, thou shalt not kill. But you know what? God decides to sacrifice all the firstborn children of Egypt for to get the Jews out. But now you can say, well, the Jews were oppressed for 400 years, but the people that you killed, God, aren't the same people that oppressed you.
Yeah.
So then that is murder by the very definition of the term, right? So when you say thou shalt not murder, but then you go murder, where's the good there, right?
Well, these are fundamental problems with Christianity. That you're right. But yeah. But anyway, I think Christianity does hold the idea that things have good is independent. It stands independent. It does hold.
Yeah,
if you ask a Christian, they'll answer it that way. He's not. I think that's curious.
Well, I think so. It depends if you buy into divine command theory or God is good theory,
Sure.
right? Like,
Yeah.
so you have to figure out, if God is good, then he can't say anything bad. Then you have to reconcile whatever's bad in the text, and then. But if divine command, which is a lot of Muslims and Christians adhere to, which is this idea that whatever God says is good, it's good just because he says it again.
Yeah.
The religious goal in Christianity is the establishment of the kingdom of heaven on earth. It's goal dependent.
Okay, right.
And so it's in reference to a goal.
So,
or the goal would be the
but
imitation of Christ.
Someone's goal, right, can be something that doesn't encompass being in congruence with God or being with God.
No, the thing that they want to be in
right, okay. It is God.
That's right.
Sorry,
That's right. That's good. That's great. The thing they want to be in congruence with is fundamentally equivalent to their God.
So what makes someone a Christian and what makes someone not a Christian? What makes, like that's what I'm trying to figure out. Because
that's a good question.
Yes.
Yeah, well, probably the deepest answer to that is willingness to shoulder your cross voluntarily and trudge uphill regardless of circumstances.
Okay, so someone can have a God, because in your definition, your first preference, that is God, right? So someone can believe in God, right, and not be a Christian, right?
Yeah, well, there's a statement that Christ makes in the Gospels. He says, not everyone who says, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom of heaven.
So not that they're even saying that they believe in God, but they just...
I know, but that's why I'm saying this to you, is that Christ himself points out that there's a difference between people who say they believe and people who act it out. And the fundamental issue is the action rather than the stated belief.
But he also says that, to be saved, right, you must believe God has died for your sins, or that God has resurrected in some way. So it's like, I don't necessarily think that we can take from the Bible and say that, like, acting in accordance with God necessarily means, or acting in accordance with, the principles of God, like, for example, sacrifice, like you talk about, means that you are Christian. I don't see how you can get that from that interpretation and then, kind of justify it as the truth.
I don't think that the fact that you sacrifice is sufficient to make you Christian.
So can we repeat once again what you believe makes someone Christian?
There's many things, but one of the most fundamental is that you believe that the cosmos itself is founded on the principle of voluntary self-sacrifice. Best founded. Let me offer you a contrary example.
So that's a weird thing to say, because the cosmos itself is not founded upon that, especially in Christianity. That it is the case in Hinduism. The Purusha Suktam, right? The primordial Purusha sacrifices himself to create all things. Right. In the Christian world, there's no sacrifice. Like, Jesus is an atonement. It's not for creation. It's to correct the wrongs of their earlier creation in some sense.
Yeah.
So it's a really weird thing to say that.
Yeah. I think he's coming up with his own ideas, which honestly, again, they're all aligning with what we kind of say, but then he's trying to apply it on Christianity. And I think that's the frustration of the room right here.
Yeah, look, at some level, there is this. He does have these very. I mean, he's very Jungian, right? And Jung was deeply influenced by Hindu and Buddhist thought. He's written quite a bit about it, right? These archetypes also derive from that, and so he is trying to bring some of these ideas, these meta ideas, are built into Hinduism at the very core, and Buddhism too, right? They just are, like this idea of this, Adidevic, Adibautic, and Adhyatmic interpretations of texts, and the exegesis hermeneutics of it's built in, right? So a word like Indra can mean not only Indra, but all can refer to your mind in some sense. Your senses, or the Devatas are actually mapped on to different aspects of one's being, right? So psychologically, physically, and even like spiritually. So there is a deep. You could do the meta work there. It's tough to do it within Christianity, because when I've read a lot of the scholars, it's very difficult for them to do this mapping on, because they have to accept the history of the text and how it happened versus but he doesn't. I don't know if he accepts the history of this stuff, and then that's another point.
So I could assume that power rules, and so that my assumption would be, if I can make you do it, I win, right? And I can found a whole society on that, and that happens a lot, by the way. And that's also how societies tend to degenerate. And so that would be a society that was founded on the principle that you get to sacrifice and I don't have to. Right now, the contrary to that would be something like, you give up voluntarily and with courage all the things you need to situate yourself properly in relationship to the future and other people. Right. So then there's a harmony. That's why I talk about harmony.
So this is also where it's like, I think some of this stuff is very amorphous. Like,
Mhm.
I like, what do you mean you found a society on self-sacrifice? So society is founded on multiple things, including selfishness, because you desire personal property, you want to build wealth, you want to do all this stuff. But it is also found on sacrificing for kin, especially for younger generations, right? You know, parents will die for their children. And that could be like because it's evolutionary built into us, because we know they will outlive us and exceed us. But it's a very interesting thing to take this position he's taking, as if it's one or the other in any given society.
Yes. Yeah, this is a very common thing that he does is he'll pick that one thing and then be like, "This is where the societies are built on," and I'm like, "Okay."
Yeah,
it's very frustrating to listen to him because what he's saying is not wrong, and you just got to think a little bit of why he's saying what he's saying is just doesn't hold up. Or
right. Look, he has all the markings of a. He is an intelligent guy. He's very intelligent. He knows stuff. I think he's wrong about a lot of his interpretations and his like assessments, but like nonetheless, he talks incredibly well and he is persuasive. And you know, I get why people like follow him because he does say good things, but I think he's wrong more often than he's not, and this kind of stuff.
Many earlier.
So you navigate your life, right, in accordance kind of to this principle of self-sacrifice. Can I say it in that way?
Yes, you can
Right.
definitely say it that way. That's exactly right. And navigate is the right term.
So someone does not have to have any awareness of Christ, of the story of Jesus, but let's say 60% of their actions, right, or more, whatever kind of metric you want to use, are in line with this self-sacrificial.
So the Christian thinkers of the Middle Ages dealt exactly with that problem when they were talking about the pre-Christian philosophers, for example. And they noted the similarity, let's say, between pre-Christian Greek thought and later Christian thought, and presumed that there were more.
Yes, later Christian thought and pre-Christian thought were similar because the Christians took their pre-Christian thought and made it their own. So you will find similarities here. So it's not as if like they came out of freaking China and said, "Oh, there's similarities here," or whatever it is. And maybe some of these are universals that we'll find similarities because, again, certain things across societies are going to be there, which is tribalism and protection and things for your community, and I get that, but this is where it's like the Christian philosophers of the Middle Ages that talked about the pre-Christian thinkers. The only reason they say, you know, they're good is because they do not know of Christ.
Yeah.
So I mean, that's the whole. And then, but after that, it's like no. If you know of Christ, then you forsake it. You're not Christian. Yeah.
Exactly.
Moral actors outside the Christian domain.
Right.
They're
So is that
addressing
person Christian, though? Is that person Christian?
Well, to some degree, again, that's a matter of definition because
Exactly.
they wouldn't be proclaiming Christian propositions, but they're acting out the pattern.
Of
Right. So
Christianity.
so imagine that full Christianity would involve a dozen things, and you can imagine someone who knows nothing of Christianity, say, acting out 8 of them.
Right.
Right.
So
then they'd be 8/12 Christian or something like
8/12
that.
Christian.
Well,
but to be like a full Christian, how can someone say I am Christian? Like I am Christian, not 8/12, but Christian.
Well,
don't understand.
I hesitate to do that personally because I think it's the kind of goal that you be very careful about proclaiming. The technical.
But belief is not necessarily, to be mostly Christian, belief is not necessary. 8/12s or, right?
Well, it depends on what you mean by belief. See, because I would say that acting out the pattern is the deepest form of belief. Now, you could add to that what you say. So, maybe in the optimal situation, how you act and what you imagine and what you say, they're the same. Right? But you can imagine a hypocrite who says all sorts of wonderful things and does nothing. And you could imagine another person who acts in a very positive manner but proclaims nothing.
So what I'm kind of seeing is like a descriptive, a really comprehensive but descriptive analysis of human action, human thought, and by which we can characterize people and put people in boxes. But I don't see.
Why in boxes?
Like, when I say in boxes, I mean like I can categorize you based on your actions, not based on necessarily what you say, but based on your actions that you are more so or less so Christian, right? Things like that, right? So we can categorize people as Christian.
Well, I would say more or less voluntarily self-sacrificing.
But that's also what we came to, though, is that someone can be like 60% or 70% Christian based on simply just acting in that way.
Yeah, Richard Dawkins is like that.
I watched that debate.
Let's pause there. You've been voted out by the majority.
Very good.
Thank you so much.
Really, very thoughtful.
You want to watch the guy that goes to town on him?
Danny, sure, let's do it.
Yeah.
Is that next? Yeah, that's nice.
Is that it?
Hey, Dr. Peterson.
How you doing?
I know
Nice to
he
meet you.
likes
What's your
Hinduism, by
name?
the way.
Danny?
He's like he likes
You're
it a
saying
lot.
atheists worship
FYI.
things or people or places, whatever. Can you be very clear about your definition of worship again?
Attend to, prioritize, and sacrifice for.
Okay, that's it. That's your understanding of worship.
Well, I could flesh it out, but that'll do for the time we have.
Okay. Do Catholics attend to Mary?
Oh, yes,
Okay. So do they fit that description of worship?
yes.
So you would say Catholics and other people that revere Mary, like the Eastern Orthodox tradition, worship Mary.
Well, they might not put her in the highest
But you would
place.
put it that way.
No.
You just said it. Now you're taking it back
There's
now?
still a hierarchy.
Okay, there's a hierarchy, but within the
There's something at the top.
All right, you can worship things
Mary is
below.
quite a ways up the hierarchy, but not at the top.
Let's go over your definition of worship again. What's your definition of worship?
Attend to,
Attend to.
prioritize,
Do
and
Catholics
sacrifice for.
do Catholics attend to? Do they prioritize Mary over all other human beings?
No, I didn't say overall, did I? I didn't
Well,
add that to
you
my
under- you
definition.
understand-
I said there was a hierarchy as
You,
well.
you attend to
So you can
Catholic-
attend to something trivially, or you can attend to it deeply.
and now
there's
you're
a-
adding stuff to the definition. But your original
I
definition.
added the hierarchy part at the beginning.
So prioritizing by definition is you put it above something else. In that context, what do you want to call it? You put it above something else. So it's weird because like attending to is just like attention. Like this is at this time attending to this because it's something that needs to get done. Prioritizing means I have other things to do, but I'm choosing to do this because it's a higher level to me.
Yep.
And so I'm not sure like
Even the
These are
sacrifice
very-
part, I think is very interesting. Interesting word choice.
right. And I don't know what he means by that, but like it could be like giving up something for, which is my guess.
Yeah.
And in some ways, yeah, you can say, when like it's somewhat kind of prioritization too, because like it's
You're
when you
forgoing your
prioritize
other
something,
things to prioritize
yeah.
that. Yeah, it's opportunity cost. Sure.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
All right.
Beginning.
Are you
just
familiar?
didn't understand it.
Are you familiar with the Immaculate Conception?
Why is that relevant?
Because you go to a Catholic church, don't you? Or you've attended recently. You're interested in Catholicism, aren't you?
Sure,
All right. Are you familiar with their doctrines?
somewhat.
Okay, you're
Their
familiar.
doctrines are
How
very
do they
deep.
regard Mary?
Why are you asking me that?
Because you're a Christian.
You say that. I haven't claimed that.
Well, what is this? Is this Christians versus atheists?
I don't know.
You don't know where you are right now.
Don't be a smartass.
Well,
and I mean
either
it,
you're
'cause
So from what I understood is originally this was titled a Christian versus 20 atheists.
Yes.
But
When
they
I watched this
changed-
video, it was Christians versus atheists, 20 atheists.
and then they changed it to Jordan Peterson.
Yeah.
It's interesting, right? So all these people came on because they thought they were going to talk to a Christian. Interesting.
I
Christian
won't
or you're
talk to
not.
you if you're a smartass.
Oh, either you're a Christian or you're not. Which one is it?
I could be either of them, but I don't have to tell you.
You don't have to tell me. I was under the impression
private.
I was invited to talk to a Christian. Am I not talking to a Christian?
No, you were invited to.
I think everyone should look at the title of the YouTube channel. You're probably in the wrong YouTube video,
You're really quite something. You are.
aren't I? But you're really quite nothing, right? You're not a
Okay,
Christian.
I'm done with him.
All right. So, I mean, it was a burn, but like, was that necessary? Would he do that to score points? Is that what this was?
I think he did it for his TikTok page. And you know what? He accomplished it. No, but yeah, maybe not. Maybe he could have been a little more trying to understand what Jordan Peterson was trying to say. But
You know him,
I
right?
think, yeah. He's not like that on his live. Actually, he's actually one of the most calm atheists.
Well,
When he'll
maybe
be
we
like,
could talk to him at some point.
he's great to talk to. And if you talk to Christians on his TikTok, he's actually super calm. He's like more so than most atheists who would like
Yeah.
Reddit atheists on TikTok. They're like, you believe in flying man in the sky? He's just like, well, okay, I see what you're saying, but blah, blah, blah. He's very like charitable to the Christians he talks to. I think he went off on here. And I think part of it is I think he just took this opportunity to be like, you know what? I have a YouTube page. I want to do it full time. I need followers to do it full time. I'm going to take this opportunity to be bombastic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So here's the
Which,
question.
like respect.
What's the point? What's the pointing of attend to if he knows there's a higher than something he's attending to, like Mary? I want to see what you mean by that. Are you saying like why worship Mary if you know there's like God? Is that the question? Or I mean, so Vaishnava Pro, if you want to like kind of expand on that, I'll bring it back up and then we can talk. We can attend to that. Okay, let's see what Prem says. I struggle to understand Peterson's take that one be both Christian and non-Christian at the same time.
Yeah, me too, buddy. Me
Well,
too.
I think the only issue is like on that. It's because I think we think about Christianity as simply a belief system that is really about a faith in a particular set of like doctrines or positions, right? Like believing Jesus, believing God, believe that there's a spirit, believe that Jesus sacrificed himself for all humanity, and Jesus is the same as God. Something like that. And that's because that's how they define it. I mean, it's like that. I think the question would be much easier for a Hindu to say I'm Hindu, but not also Hindu. I mean, like it's much easier because like those our category is pretty
broad, yeah.
Yeah. Sorry, Vaishnava Pro. So that I was correct in saying that. What's the point of attending to Mary if you know there's God? Within the Catholic system, I don't know if they say they worship Mary. I think they say they venerate Mary.
I'll explain it. So
Yeah,
Mary is a saint, and so
yeah, they only venerate saints. They don't worship.
Yeah, they venerate saints. Saints do certain things outside of it. Like they can testify on your behalf. They do. There's a really good video that made me understand it, but you can look it up. I think some Catholics explain it really well. If you want to look up what.
No. So I went to Catholic school. So it's this is what I think it is. And there's a Catholic in the space. Please go ahead and tell me I'm wrong. But so you only worship God. You only worship God in the triune form. And you can worship God as Father, God as Son, or Holy Spirit. Yeah. But the saints, and you venerate them because they, especially Mary, because she could intercede on your behalf, where she comes to Jesus and intercedes on you. She steps in for you in some sense, right? I mean, that's kind of how they view it. That the role of the saints and Mary. It's funny. The analogy I'll make closest is maybe they're like bodhisattvas in that context of. Not the same as coming down again, but like they got into heaven. They're trying to hold their hand down to grab other people up if you venerate them. Is kind of what I'm saying. Right. So like to pull you up and say, "Hey, God, can this person come in?" Something of that nature. Is how. Okay, so he didn't. Okay, why is worshiping Mary? If there's a hierarchy, he didn't get a chance to answer it. Does this hierarchy help for that highest one, or is just points? There's above me go further. I think there's ideas like there's this hierarchy of change. You just kind of move up. I don't know what Peterson's view on that is. Okay, Prem says, what's the difference between veneration and worship? I don't know if they're. I think there's a fine line. I mean, veneration, I think, is you hold to esteem, but worship is you kind of give up to. I don't know if there's if I'm. Let me take a look. Let's see what the definitional dictionary is, or Chat GPT versus worship. Are distinct terms. Veneration generally refers to the act of showing respect, reverence, or honor, while worship implies a deeper level of devotion and adoration. So, maybe it could be something along in the sense of in the Sri Vaishnavite tradition, maybe you can venerate gods, but you worship only Lakshmi Narayana or something like that. The Shaivites will probably have something else, like for example, although Madhvas are interesting because they will say, you worship the other gods, but you worship them as forms of Vishnu's or devotees of Vishnu or something like that. So there's something there. All right, let's get back here. Let's see who's the next person.
Hi there. Okay. Hi, nice
What's your name?
Gerard.
Hello, Gerard.
Nice to meet you, sir. So you've said that worship is when you prioritize and sacrifice for something, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
But there's a hierarchy in there.
Sure.
Okay.
So I prioritize and sacrifice for my wife more than I would prioritize and sacrifice.
Oh, is this worth listening to? Do you remember?
I'm not sure. I don't think so. I mean, I think this guy's really good right here. Also, someone that I know on TikTok.
Oh, this guy?
Yeah, this guy with the curly hair. Yeah, he's worth talking.
All right, let's do this claim. Okay.
My final claim is that atheists accept Christian morality, but deny the religion's foundational story.
Oh, this will be good.
Hi there.
It's very nice to meet you.
What's
I'm
your
Ian.
name?
I'm Ian.
Hi, Ian.
Yes. So God says that you can own people as property. He says that you can beat them with a rod too. He commands genocide in Deuteronomy, in Numbers, and in Samuel. I mean, they have a goddamn baby barbecue in Numbers. Like, is all of this in line with Christian ethics?
No.
So then God doesn't fit within Christian ethics.
Well, the biblical library is a continuing story, and everything written in it has to be contextualized by the entire text. There's 65,000 hyperlinks in the biblical text. And you can take pieces of it out of context and criticize them, and that's what you're doing. But that's a mistake, I think. It's an analytic mistake because you're putting the cart before the horse.
I really don't think so. I think
Yeah,
that
no,
if we say that something is Christian ethics, then I think that all of the books essential to Christianity would fit with it, especially if it's like the main character. When we're talking
How
about
do you deal with
God,
the morality of war?
So-
How do you think you should deal with the morality of war?
Sure. Because I feel like the morality, like I feel like Christian ethics, like this is kind of, I guess I just think it's like kind of an absurdity to say that God doesn't fit within Christian ethics. But sure, well, we can go on my ethics. That's totally fine.
I don't know what you.
So it's similar to what we said earlier. The youth for dilemma is God within the purview of his own ethics he sets forth, or is he the exception to every rule?
Yeah.
You mean by an absurdity? What game are you playing with?
Well,
that
I just think
question?
that it's an absurdity to say that the Christian God doesn't fit within Christian ethics. That like the Christian
I
God
didn't
isn't
say
like
that.
Christian
I
ethical.
said that the specific statements that you made don't take the context of the stories into account, and so that your analytical approach is faulty.
Sure.
Don't put words in my mouth.
Sure, then let's go through
Thank
the
you.
example. Yeah, so, and I apologize. So let's go through the example. So in 1 Samuel 15:3, God says, go and slaughter the Amalekites, slaughter the men, the women, the children, the infants. What's the justification for that? Is that in line
That's a
with
good
Christian
question.
ethics?
That's a good question. I don't really know what to do with the terrible, blood-soaked, saturated history of the human past. I don't know, and I don't think anybody knows. I mean,
No. You don't get to do this. You don't get to do this. You don't get to say so condescending, so confidently you're taking it out of context, and therefore your analytical process is faulty. And then he's like, okay, so give me the context. He's like, I don't know what to make of war. I don't know. How about you use your Christian ethics and apply yourself to it, or apply the stories to your Christian ethics?
Well, the problem is also, okay, he wants to say this isn't. First of all, like I think when he talks to these about these stories, I don't think he believes they're literally true. He's trying to say they're narratives, right? They're narratives there to convey some sort of meta truth or meta ideal of wisdom. Now, in the context of just the narrative, what is the purpose of God's action here? And I think the problem is like he can't answer that.
Yeah.
I mean, he wants to then obfuscate to say, well, I don't know what to do with the human history of war. I mean, but forget human history of war. What is this text saying about war? And what is this text saying about what God wants in a war? Yeah. So I feel like you're not addressing the core of that question.
I mean, what you try to do in your own life, as far as I can tell, is to conduct yourself in a manner that makes such things much more unlikely.
I totally agree.
We're all saddled with the problem of the catastrophes that got us here, aren't we?
Yeah, but this one was commanded by God. That's the problem.
Yeah,
That's what differentiates it from anything else, is that this one, it's God saying, go and do this atrocity.
Do you think that there's ever such a thing as a righteous war?
I'm skeptical. I'm not sure. It would probably be situational.
Well, right. Fair enough.
But this one certainly wasn't a just war. The
in war.
context for the Amalekite slaughter is that 400 years earlier, they fought one battle, which they lost, and God says, that's it, I'm going to wipe them off the face of the goddamn earth. And then 400 years later, he commands the Israelites to genocide their great-great-great-great-great-great-grandchildren. That's not a just war at all. And also, a genocide is not a war.
Well, a genocide can be a war, but...
Absolutely not.
Look,
the genociding of the Amalekites, the men, the women, and the infants, that's not a war. The infants aren't combatants.
Look, I already said that it's very difficult to look at the blood-soaked past and to know exactly what to do about it. The answer I gave to the gentleman who was sitting here before you is that it's necessary to read a text like the Bible at all of its levels of analysis simultaneously. And there's a directional morality that emerges across time that has its roots in the Old Testament, for example, with its restrictions against murder specifically, that makes itself manifest in the Christian texts as the insistence on voluntary self-sacrifice as the foundational belief. That's a...
What nonsense is that? What nonsense? The entire Old Testament, there's rampant killing. God commands and does himself.
Yeah.
What is his self-sacrifice?
Yeah.
So again, this is like, how do you square that circle?
Yeah. By the way, I should say, Ian, I think is his name. He's often a guest on Deconstruction Zone. Someone you should absolutely have on your podcast, by the way, is Deconstruction. I know him, but he follows me on TikTok. I'll see if I can reach out to him. This guy is often a guest on there. This man is a biblical scholar, ex-Christian, but he went to seminary school. Has a expertise in Greek, ancient Hebrew, learned Old Testament, New Testament, textual studies. He can probably explain this. Yeah. This guy knows the Bible in and out. Ian sits in as a guest sometimes, and so I think that's why he's able to kind of deal with these things in greater detail.
I like it. It's good. Reach out to him and let's see if we can do something.
Yeah, but yeah. Anyways, it's a little context on why Ian's able to quote Samuel and Numbers and so on and so forth. Yeah.
It's a profoundly anti-violence ethos.
Do you have the belief in your theology?
Well, what do you think of that? Wait a sec. Now, redress what I just said.
So I'm about to address it, but I'm addressing it with a question. Do you think that God is by his very essence perfect?
You'll have to provide more.
Sure, just like maximally great and all like the great making qualities.
Sure.
Yeah, like flawless. Yeah. So does a flawless thing change? Does a flawless thing reveal like more and better information over time, or would a flawless thing say, here's what's good, here is the absolute good thing to do at all circumstances in time?
Well, we know some of that.
Wait,
Tell the truth. That's one.
That's totally fine, but
no. You don't get to skate over that. That's totally fine.
By the way, where in the 10 Commandments is thou shalt not lie? Is it one of the 10 Commandments?
No. No, it's not.
Yeah. So.
Yeah, Prem, I'm in the same boat. I think this is. This one's a really interesting conversation. Some of them are really stupid, but I think. This is something Christian apologists try to often do with these type of situations, is that they present these situations as it's a commentary on a horrific reality that we as people have history have had to deal with, and they just avoid the idea that God is like the engineering force behind why these atrocities are happening. Now, I don't know if Jordan's gonna ever answer if God's perfect. I think Ian, he tangentized himself enough to let him avoid that question. We'll see if he gets to it. But
yeah, let's see what happens next.
Straw man of my position. It's a straw man of the argument. So the argument is that God,
wait a sec. You said find one maxim that's transcendent across situations.
I didn't say any of those words. I'm not sure what conversation you're a part of.
Don't be a smartass.
I'm sorry.
Seriously, I mean it. If we're going to have a serious conversation, conduct yourself properly. Okay. Rephrase your question because I must have missed it. I tried to answer it.
So in my mind, I guess by my lights, a perfect being doesn't change. A perfect being, if they're maximally good, maximally moral.
Does our understanding of the perfect being change?
Our understanding might, but presumably what the perfect being is revealing.
Well, I agree. How do we distinguish between that, though, at the human level?
How do we distinguish between
our transforming understanding of perfection and perfection itself?
Between our
we can only see through our own lenses.
Presumably, a perfect being would be revealing all of these aspects all the time, especially if God's outside of time. I don't know how a God who's outside of time is revealing different things at different times. That just seems like incoherent to me.
Imagine something that's perfect, and complete, okay, and it's trying to communicate with creatures who are anything but that. Well, they're going to get it wrong. Okay, now wait a sec. Do you blame that on the interpreters or the phenomena itself?
Okay.
He didn't just do that.
But here's the problem. Again, he's accepted all this position that your buddy just stated. But if it's a perfect being, could you not communicate perfectly so that no one would not misunderstand? Right? I mean, I just feel like there's a jump in logic here that just totally off kilter, right? Where you accept the maximally perfect, omniscient, omnipotent, all these qualities that you want to claim, but somehow you just can't communicate it. Humanity knows, right? Like it's a doozy.
It's just so much because it's like, okay, it's an easy dodge. Oh, we're just interpreting it wrong. But then also speaks to God who can interpret it. Anyways, yeah, I hear you.
Right. So if it's the word of God and it's been preserved, now he might argue actually it hasn't been preserved well. Fair enough. Then we're in another stage of communication. But I mean, there's other issues with that. Then why should we accept it at all? Okay, but we'll get to that point later.
So in
Like,
this
for
case-
example, are you
well, yeah, I
perfect in
blame this-
attending to your conscience?
Hold on. At the point in time when God is literally the one who created us, he could have created us in a way where we would always be receptive to these principles,
There we go.
where we don't have to go across like a learning curve where, maybe we'll understand
maintain
like
free will.
thousands of years into the future, maybe we'll do it. Oh, also, if you believe in an all-knowing God, then free will is impossible because
Wait
if
a
it,
sec. Let's not go to that
because
yet.
you threw free will into the mix.
Well, that was the answer to your question.
Yeah, and
you
I'm
said,
saying
why
that's
wouldn't God?
incoherent.
Well,
It's
1,000
contradictory.
years of deep thinking philosophers would disagree with you.
Yeah,
But having
and
your
at that
So first of all, yeah, they would disagree, but they also don't solve the freaking problem.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, at the end of it, like you can disagree all you want. What's your solution? That you come up with like middle knowledge and modal. It just no. It's really now you can say it's a linguistic issue, like the idea that is God so full he can make a square circle. No, that's a definitional issue, right? So there's just like a square is defined by four corners, a circle's not, and yeah. So that's a different position than to say, can God, who knows everything, knows all things, do things that he doesn't know the person is going to do? Maybe it's definitional there too, but probably not.
Yeah.
God knows it doesn't. That's all it is. It's a very simple thing.
Yeah.
But this is the thing I've been arguing for a long time, right? The idea of free will, and the lack thereof, at least ontologically, is a position I hold. But I'm open to some level of negotiation there. But ultimately, I think epistemologically, it exists because we don't know what we're going to do. We don't know what the actions are, right? So for us, it feels like free will, even though it might not be true.
1,000 years of, or at least like last 50 years of philosophers would disagree with you. These analytic philosophers, people like Graham Oppy make arguments about the incompatibility of omniscience and free will, that if God created this world, if he chose this world instead of that world, then he makes it causally inevitable every single action that you were going to make. If he made a world where we were just electrons in love, then none of this would have happened. But by making us in this world, knowing exactly what's going to happen in the future, it makes all of those events inevitable, which means that they're all causally determined, which means that we have no free will if you believe in an all-good God or an all-knowing God that made everything.
Well, have it your way.
Okay, cool. So then the free will theodicy fails.
Well, it fails for you. That doesn't mean you've disproved it. I mean,
Do you
you
want to
tried to
respond to
make
the argument?
yes,
That's
you tried to
what
make
you
a case
think.
for a causally deterministic universe. I don't think there's any evidence for that at all.
Do you think that God could have created a different universe than the one that he created?
I have no idea.
Okay, so then there's going to be a double bind, right? So either he couldn't have done it, in which case he lacks a power, or he could have done it, in which case we don't have free will, because he chose this world instead of that world, making the events of this world instead of that world inevitable with his infallible knowledge.
I don't understand where you're headed.
Well, it just means that the free will defense fails. Like all this, under
Like I
your
said,
view,
if you
under
want
your
to have
view,
it
free
fail,
will.
no problem. I don't know why it's relevant to the issue.
Do you acknowledge that under your view, free will doesn't exist?
No.
Oh, then do you want to respond to the argument?
You'll have to phrase it more
Sure,
clearly
okay.
so that someone
So-
like me can understand it.
Yeah, gotcha. So God already knows in advance everything that's going to happen, which means that by making this world instead of that world, everything is inevitable, which means that God's act of causing this world instead of that
Inevitable
world,
doesn't mean determined.
it's causally inevitable if God chooses this world instead of that world.
Doesn't make it
Causally,
determined.
causally inevitable means determined.
No, it doesn't.
Absolutely, yes, it does.
Well, have it your way.
What is have it your way? What is this? Why is he throwing out Burger King slogans?
It's a weird thing. This is a weird thing for a couple of reasons. One is inevitable means it's causally determined. It does. What it means, it didn't mean God necessarily. I mean, it does in some sense, like, because God picked this, because that's his argument. If God picked this universe, he knew all these steps and he knew this was going to happen. So he chose the way it's going to happen. So how do you get around that point? You can't say, like, free will is chaos. The whole idea of free will is it breaks causal chains. Where do you see causal chains breaking? Like, I don't get it. Like it's like, do you see people? I mean, this is the thing. It's like people are always going to always. This is always the case. They're going to do things based upon prior things, no matter what. Like everything in the world, it happens in succession. It doesn't happen. Something doesn't happen in the past. I mean, now it's like where it's like my current action is not the result of my future action. It's the result of my past actions or past causal consequences. So I don't get this argument. And Abbas the alchemist, these are only real metaphysical problems with monotheistic conception of God. I disagree. I think there are only problems with a ex nihilo conception of God, of creation. I think you can have a monotheistic view without, as long as it's eternal creation and not ex nihilo. So, Sammy, you got like 5-10 more minutes. We'll close out. Then?
Yeah. Well, yeah. Was at the end of the hour would be ideal.
Right, cool.
I would say
that's
this is more of Abrahamic idea of God. Oh, Abrahamic is also tough, but yeah, I'd say more Christian Islamic ideas of God are more ex nihilo. Which I don't know if the text actually supports ex nihilo, but that's the modern interpretation. So,
well, I mean, it's interesting because in the Genesis, God didn't create the causal waters; they're already there.
Yeah,
so,
yep. Even in Islam, it says He separates the heavens and the earth. It doesn't say He created them.
Yeah, but I don't know why. Did He not say? I actually don't know. Actually, that's interesting. I thought they were.
The universe is created by separation, not by a creation.
Interesting. Okay.
The case. You've been voted out by the majority. Please return to your seat.
Nice to meet you.
Very zippy. What's your name?
I'm Liam.
Hi, Liam. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Not too bad. I'm
Good.
surrounded by atheists.
My question to you, let me scoot in, would be, what does it mean to accept Christian values precisely, or Christian morality?
It means to aim up as hard as you can, no matter what happens to you.
Okay.
Generic.
So I think that.
Yeah, I mean, what is unique about that in Christian morality? Aim up.
I guess we don't aim up. Sorry to break the news to you. You've never aimed up before.
It's such a weird thing to say.
Yeah.
Like, I think most moral traditions, the very concept of having a moral framework means you're something you're trying to achieve. So aiming up, I guess, right? Yeah.
I think that that's a very broad definition of what Christian morality is.
Yeah, but it'll come in handy at some point in your life.
Right. But I think that many different disciplines and theologies.
Well, you asked for a truncated answer. I
Right.
mean, there's other ways of representing the
Yeah.
situation, but I wanted to give you something that was kind of foundational briefly.
Yeah, that makes sense.
It doesn't mean it's, exhaustive.
Yeah.
I could say that you would have to believe that Christ is God and He died for your sins, right? But that's in a very difficult way to understand. That's the same claim.
Yeah. If there are other theologies and disciplines that have similar types of values, how then is that definition mean? Wouldn't those also be Christian values under your definition?
That's a good question. I spent a lot of time studying different religious systems from all over the world and found multiple interesting layers of concordance.
Right.
So, for example, in ancient Egypt, their god Horus, who was the reviving god of the totalitarian state, he was the god of attention. Right, and the Jews hypothetically came out of Egypt, and there was crosstalk between Egyptian and Jewish foundational morality, and then that bled into Christianity. I mean, human beings all over the world have come up with moral systems that fit roughly into a pattern, and they're very usefully studied. Now, I learned a lot about Christianity by studying Taoism, for example, a lot. So I think you can make a case that Christianity formalized the landscape of good and evil more comprehensively and in more detail than any other religious system. And I think that that's part of the reason that it defeated paganism and spread so broadly across the West and is still
defeated paganism versus.
But I would. Stupid. No, first of all, I think Richard Carrier has a really good video on YouTube about this. But what we consider Christian morality is just I think you alluded to this earlier, just a borrowing of Greek philosophical thinking and Greek morality.
Well, not completely. I mean, there are some, for example, Bart Ehrman is coming out with a book that's talking about how Christian morality did change some elements of the world. And it's a fair point, at least in the pagan West, let's say the Greco-Roman world, there was an element of Christian, let's say, compassion and love for the downtrodden that was unique to Christianity in that ancient Middle East world, and even the Greco-Roman world. I think in the Hindu traditions, in Buddhist tradition, it's different, very much so. But in the sense of different from the pagan world, there's elements of that. What Christianity holds important, there's elements of that in the Hindu world too.
Fair enough.
On this point, I just think it's like, what do you mean? I mean, I hate to sound like him, but what do you mean that it formulated the best concept of good and evil? Again, I don't think it did at all. I think you read any of the Shanti Padva or you read any of the conversations within a lot of the Mahabharata, the concept of good and evil is way, way more fleshed out of good actions, bad actions, and the purpose of any of this stuff. I think it's so much stronger than the Christian thought. Just my view. Like, for example, even when Rama, look at Ramayana, when Rama kills Ravana, and he then gives Ravana a proper burial instead of destroying and looting the body. He talks about Arya Dharma, about the concept of you don't fight enemies that run away from you, that drop their arms. You don't fight non-combatants. You don't do what the God of Israel did when it came to the Canaanites or the Egyptians. You don't kill children. You don't do these things that are built into what Dharma is, right? So it's important. It's like, well, did Christianity give you the best version of the right and wrong? I don't think so. And I think Christian history over the 2 centuries until the modern age proves that.
Still dominant, still understructures our culture, for example.
The way you feel about Horus or Taoism or something is how I feel about Christian morals, I think.
Yeah, but how do I feel about them?
Well, that you took inspiration from them, you learned from them. Maybe
that's a good start,
right?
Because I would say that actually constitutes belief. Like you said, well, look.
Right.
In Noah, in the story of Noah, right? Noah is inspired by the apprehension that all hell is going to break loose. Okay, he regards that inspiration as God.
Okay,
right. And when God comes to Abraham, he comes to Abraham as the spirit of adventure. It's inspiration. One of the definitions of
what? I mean, no, God commands them. What do you mean comes to them in the spirit of venture? Abraham, go to the city of Ur, and I mean, like, what? What is this?
Yeah.
It's like the reading of things onto a text that it's not even about.
Of God in the Old Testament, unsurprisingly, given the derivation of the word, is inspiration. And so if you take inspiration from Christian ideas, then insofar as you do that, you are in fact a believer, which was my point with regards to atheists
correct.
Not understanding.
But have you taken inspiration from Taoism or from studying Egyptian mythology?
Definitely.
So then you believe them under that definition?
Yeah, but I've incorporated them into something I think that's more comprehensive.
Is it possible to take inspiration and to appreciate the teachings without being a believer in their truth claims?
It depends. No, I don't think so. But I think, you see, there are different kinds of truth claims, right? There's propositional truth claims, which are the truth claims of what you say. And then there's embodied truth claims, which is the truth claims of what you do. That should be prioritized. Optimally, what you say and what you do would be brought into harmony. But I would say if you had to prioritize, it should be what you attend to and what you act first. And that's what Christ actually says in the Gospels, because he points to the Pharisees, for example, who say all the right things, but don't do any of the right things, and points out very clearly that that's not acceptable.
I don't know that the Christian morality, those principles originate in Christianity, because you brought up other things that predate Christianity that you can very closely tie connections to.
Well, I don't think they do originate precisely. I mean, I don't think the Christian claim is exactly that they originate in Christianity.
So if I'm living those values, how is it that I'm living the Christian values and maybe not the Egyptian values or something else?
Well,
there. You've been voted out by
that was good. That was good. Yeah.
Hi.
Hello there. How are you doing?
I'm good. How are you?
Good. What's your name?
I'm Kumari. So I was curious about this Christian morality that you're talking about, because a lot of my issues with Christianity have to do with the base morality of it, specifically with the idea of the rapture and how we see people that aren't going to come up with us with the rapture, and that concept of heaven and hell. I don't really agree with that morality, but if you could explain that to me and how I do agree with that, I would love to hear.
Well, I can't explain the rapture to you because that isn't something I concern myself with, and that's more of a sectarian belief than something that's central to Christianity. Now, there's all sorts of evangelical Protestants who might disagree with that, but that doesn't have anything to do with me. You asked a deeper question with regard to, let's say, heaven and hell and judgment. Yeah. Well, that's a tough one, right? I mean, sin, you could put it this way, sin is what puts you in hell, right? And so then you might ask, well, how do you know you're in hell? How about you do anything to get out of it?
Can I ask you
How
a
about
question?
you know that you put yourself there?
Do you think, is sin a part of Christian morality?
What do you mean exactly? Sin is a part.
The
it's
concept
missing
of sin?
Okay, it's derived from an archery term, and it means to miss the target. Right, and so it presumes that there's such a thing as a central target and that you can miss it in many ways. And the consequence of that will be Your life will be ridden with anxiety. Your life will be pointless.
And what
People
if
will
I
turn
like
against you.
don't believe in sin at all?
Well, do you believe in error? Have you made any mistakes?
What if I believe that the mistakes that you make, that they're fixable, and so that no sin is finite, and that the
Well,
idea
that's a Christian belief.
of the idea of hell, I don't believe
That's
in
also
it
a Christian belief, by the way.
A Christian belief is hell?
No, that there's no sin that, well, there's one. The sin against the Holy Ghost is unforgivable, but that's really the sin against the process that would enable you to learn.
Okay. But there's a Christian belief that hell does exist, and if I commit sin, I'm going to go there, correct?
Yes.
So what if I don't believe in that? Like I think
Well, okay, let me
that
a-
when you,
okay,
can I
that's
explain
good.
a little bit?
Sure, sure.
Okay. I think that when you commit sin, that it's because of a lot of environmental factors in your life, like where you were born and who you were raised by. And so there are certain things that lead you down a dangerous path. And once you are dead, I think you're kind of removed of that person. There's no like, there are no factors of the earth that have to.
What happens after death.
Right.
So I would ask you, in these times that you suffered terribly in ways that you thought would never end, do you believe that you had any causal role in that? Like, did you play a part in that?
In my own suffering?
Yeah.
Maybe sometimes I would say that there was a part that I played in
well,
that.
okay,
But I
that's
also
the
do
thing to
think
find
that,
out.
I think that maybe it's like a concept of free will that I don't really believe in, somewhat of free will, that I think that there are certain things in your life that lead you to do certain behaviors. And so when you commit those sins, you go to hell. I'm not too sure why you would still be reaping the consequences of that.
Like I said, I can't address that. Do you believe that you can change?
I do.
Do you believe you can change for the better?
I do.
Do you believe that when you change for the better, you abandon the things you've done in the past that weren't good?
I think that you can.
Okay, then that's very much in keeping with Christian doctrine.
Can you explain to me how that's in keeping with Christian
Well,
doctrine?
you believe
if you would go to hell for
okay,
those things?
You believe you can improve.
Yeah.
Right? And you believe that if you improved, you would let go of things that were impeding you. That's a sacrifice. You believe that improvement would be upward, and you believe that you have agency in that. Yeah, those are all Christian presuppositions.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, we'll stop it here, but yeah, I mean, I think that's too many claims here about the Christian suppositions. They're not just Christian suppositions. It's not like Christianity developed any of those things. Those are all developed across many traditions that you can move up in moral value. You can right your wrongs. I mean, in fact, some of this stuff comes from Zoroastrianism. In fact, a large part of it comes from Zoroastrianism. So go ahead. Do you have anything you want to close out on?
I just think he's held back by what Christianity is. I think Peterson has a right idea of spirituality and tradition in a way that he's trying to get maybe hedonistic atheists to try to think about something greater than themselves. I think he has the right idea, but the Christian aesthetics, not just aesthetics, what the presentation of Christianity as a form of spirituality is too specific and it's too dogmatic that it will never let Jordan's ideas fully shine through. And
I mean, he's been getting a good amount of people there in his world.
He got a huge lot of for this. He got backlash, especially the part where he refused to identify himself as a Christian. A lot of Christians had something to say about that. I think they didn't like what he had to say.
Yeah, I think that's fair. But I think that's more like the evangelical side. I think other people were like, "Oh, he's a Christian now," and they're excited to have this. And
I think at that it's purely an apologetics / proselytization game. If they have a guy on their side, they're gonna love him. If at all. So, but I'm talking about his ideas being communicated to atheists or to any person.
Yeah,
he's not giving the case for Christianity. He's if at all, he's giving a case for why one should be spiritual. If anything, why one should be Hindu. I honestly, they're dharmic.
Well, I don't know about Hindu. I think that's probably stretching it too far. I think
really.
Yeah,
I think the dharmic idea of dharma. I think he's like pursue something greater than yourselves and worship something greater than yourselves.
Yeah, I think but those are all like shared in many other traditions. The Tao,
sure.
But I think he's taking these ideas and just trying to put them in the Christian garb, because I think for him, just saying these ideas without that is not as powerful narratively, and he thinks that the narratives in Christianity are able to provide the oomph to his message. But
they don't.
Look, I mean, but the truth is, you can interpret anything. I can give you a cookbook, and Sam Harris made this point, and you can find something like deeply mystical about it if you read it the right way. So it's a stupid joke, but at the end of the day, it is true. Like you could read beauty into things that, or what's it called, inspiration to things that don't necessarily have it.
Sure.
But this is the point: is like it's important to do exegesis and not eisegesis. And I think most of what Peterson does is eisegesis.
Yeah, exactly. And that's why he thinks all these things are somehow exclusive claims to this religion and not.
Yeah. So anyone on the stream listening or paying attention, do you guys have any comments, questions? I'll take a few. So shoot them up now, and then we can respond, or I'll give a couple minutes. What's the next stream we should do, man? I think I kind of want to do the review of the Hikachu debate.
Okay.
Yeah, I think so. Unless you have something else on your mind.
I have a couple. I'll shoot them. I think we'll go over it. I think I want to just DM you maybe privately. We'll go over some candidates. There's some TikToks I think would be interesting for you to review.
I'm down. I don't have a TikTok myself.
It's a browser. You can use a browser for the TikToks. Yeah.
Naveen asks, eisegesis. Eisegesis reading of scripture is when you read into the text, right? When you, instead of looking at the words and the context of the story or whatever, you read into it. So, for example, I think a lot of early Christian fathers did that with the Old Testament, right? You, for example, taking the book of Daniel and reading into it Jesus, or Elijah reading into it, Jesus, and not doing that properly. I think that's when that's called eisegesis, right?
Yeah. You have a opinion and you're cherry picking the data of a text to support that opinion.
Right. Does that? I think that should answer your question, right, Naveen? Yeah. I mean, so it's interesting. I mean, I'm without a doubt, I'm sure that happens in Hindu tradition too. It happens in almost every tradition. The question is always going to be so it's interesting because that's kind of the conversation on the Upanishads, right? When the Acharyas are doing the Brahma Sutra Bhashyas and the Upanishad Bhashya, is many people are claiming each other is reading into the text. Oh, this is not found here. You're bringing it in when you shouldn't bring in. Like, for example, calling Shankara Prachanda Buddha. You're bringing in these Buddhist ideas. They're not in there. When you can find Upanishads, some idea of higher truth, lower truth, and some of these perspectives, right? Because they're all in the same milieu. They're all talking to each other. Yeah. Cool, guys. Unless anyone sends a message up in the next 5 seconds, I think we're good.
Alrighty.
Good conversation. Thanks, Sammy. I appreciate your time.
Yeah.
And thank you, everyone, for joining us. And we will catch you soon when we get out of here. The next time we're back up, but let's take us out.
यमुना तीरे गायती वनमाली गायती वनमाली मधुरम गायती वनमाली